Hey everybody, thanks as always for the listen, for the stream, for the download, however you're getting Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. Thank you for getting it. I hope by now that you're subscribed, whether it's on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher. I hope that you've gone on iTunes and you've left a review for the show. I hope that you've gone on iTunes and you've put in that 5-star rating, because all that stuff helps this show more than I can tell you. Share it with friends, send the links around, spread the good word. I was going to say great word, but I'll say good word of Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. The other thing you can do is subscribe to the premium feed. If you want more content, only if you want more content, but if you want more content from Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast, then subscribe at Stitcher Premium, Stitcher.com/notsam. That's Stitcher.com/notsam. Not only will you get this podcast each and every week completely ad-free, but every other week, you'll get a bonus show. Every other Monday, Captive Audience comes out, where I make somebody sit down and watch something with me on the WWE Network, and I try to explain to them why wrestling is awesome. This week, Halftime Heat is up there. One of my buddies from high school, Chuck, he has to sit down with me and watch Halftime Heat. Not just the empty arena match, but the entire episode. Check it out. Watch along with us. The only place you can listen to it is using Stitcher Premium at Stitcher.com/notsam. In the meantime, enjoy this week's episode of Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. Introducing your host from New York, here is Sam Roberts.
Yes, welcome. Welcome to Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. You know how we do what we do here. We come at wrestling from a fan perspective. I'm a fan of professional wrestling. You're a fan of professional wrestling? Let's talk about it. Are we experts? Kind of. I mean, we've put in our 10,000 hours of watching by now, I'll bet. But we've watched from afar, and we're putting in our analysis. It's by a fan, for fans at Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast, and I welcome you to the show. It's always a big week, and make no mistake, this week counts just as big. It's so big, in fact, that we have a bonus guest that's going to be a part of the show during the bridge segment. If you don't listen to this bridge segment that's between the interview and the state of wrestling every week, you're missing out. There's all kinds of great content there. So that's going down later on this podcast. Of course, we have a lot to talk about in state of wrestling. A lot. You know, there was a lot went down. There's lots to talk about, I should say, with Raw and Smackdown this week. We're a week, days at this point away from the go-home edition of Raw. We're about a week and a half away from Money in the Bank. And these pay-per-views that WWE puts on are now more important than ever, because there's not a show every three weeks. These pay-per-views are now every 4 or 5 weeks, and they're dual-branded. They mean a lot more, and so there's a lot more promotion being put into them. And we're going to talk about whether that promotion's been effective. We're going to talk about how we felt coming off of this week's Monday Night Raw, and how we felt coming off of SmackDown. Of course, there's news involving pro wrestling going on in the courts that we'll talk about. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we have got to go over, and we'll do it all in the state of wrestling. But before we get there, my guest this week comes from the podcast world, but technically is also now a WWE Network personality, Mr. Conrad Thompson. A guy that I met while he was doing the Woo Nation podcast. My buddy Kevin Undergaro, who helped build the Notsam studio. He's the founder of AfterBuzz TV. He got Lillian Garcia's podcast off the ground. He got X-Pac's podcast off the ground. He's a real dude. But he's the first person that ever came to me and said, "You got to meet this Conrad guy. He's perfect. He knows all the geeky stuff. He's the perfect wrestling geek for a podcast. He does the show with Ric Flair. You got to meet him." And, you know, I met him, and I listened to the Ric Flair podcast here and there, and it was cool. And I was like, hey, good to meet you. But, you know, I didn't know him until this Bruce Prichard podcast came out. And everybody who's been listening to this podcast knows that from the beginning, I've been talking about Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard and how much I'm a fan of what Bruce and Conrad put together. Since then, I've checked out the Schiavone podcast. Lately, I've been listening to the Eric Bischoff podcast. It's just a great formula, and it really takes what we do with wrestling podcasts and helps to modernize it into what at least a section of podcasts are, and that's experts dealing with a subject where you get entertained, you learn something. It's important. People come up to me a lot, and they are starting wrestling podcasts or any kind of podcasts, and they go, "Sam, you're the last professional broadcaster." I go, "Yes, I am." And then they go, "Well, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to start a podcast?" And I go, "Look, depends on what you want to do with the podcast. If you just want a hobby, if you just want to figure out how to do it, if you just want to get good, grab a mic, talk about whatever you like to talk to, put it out there. If you've got 2 listeners, who cares, right? If you're trying to make a real go at this, then I think at this stage in the game, you've got to have a hook, and you've got to have something that separates yourself. You've got to have something that is going to push past all the clutter that is out there in podcast land. Think about all the big stars. Like, as wrestling fans, we care what Chris Jericho has to say. We care what Stone Cold has to say. We care what JR has to say. We care what Edge and Christian have to say. We care what these guys have to say, and that's one of the reasons why their podcasts are so successful. The other reason is they're great at conveying and telling stories and conveying messages and teaching us something. Conrad did a couple of things. He found people whose opinions we cared about, people within the industry, Bruce Prichard, Eric Bischoff, Tony Schiavone, but he also found a hook. He found a hook where it's like, what if we really did a deep dive into one particular topic and just did that every week? And there's something fascinating about that. You have to find the right person. It's not just about finding a guy who's a name in this business. It's about finding a guy who's not only a name in the wrestling business that people care about, but who has an expertise on this and can apply that expertise. And by the way, Conrad then has to turn around and do the work because he can find the expert, but he's the one that has to sit there and do hours of prep to make sure that he's asking the right questions. I think that is the piece of advice that I would give. If you really want to make a run at podcasting, whether it's wrestling podcasting or comedy podcasting, whatever type of podcast you want to do, you have to be able to tell me what this podcast is. I need an elevator pitch for the podcast, right? I need to know within 45 seconds, and that's giving you a lot of time. What is this podcast that you're giving me, and why should I be interested in it? And, I try to have that together for this podcast. And I think I could do that for the podcast that Conrad does. And that's one of the reasons why he's been so successful, and something that any of you guys out there that are thinking about starting podcasts, here's the benefit to living in 2018 is that there's no more gatekeeper in front of wanting a career doing this. There's no more gatekeeper. If you want a show, there's no gatekeeper. There's nobody stopping you from having a show. All you have to do is go to an electronics store, go to Guitar Center, buy a couple mics, buy a mixer, or just buy a USB mic, plug it directly into your computer, record some stuff, and put it out there. Like, there is nothing stopping anybody in 2018 from having their own show. But because of that, competition is as high as it's ever been. There's more shows out there than any time in the history of entertainment. So you need to tell me what you specifically are doing that is separating you from the group. And if you can do that, go for it, man. Go for it. Now, if you just want to start a podcast and just do a podcast for the sake of podcasting, there's nothing wrong with that either. I don't have any problem with that. Go and do that too. But it's two separate sides to the coin, I suppose. But we got to talk to Conrad, and when I say we, I mean me. I've been watching that Royal Wedding, so I've been talking like that. And we talked not only about podcasting and his philosophies behind it and succeeding and getting into it and everything, but also working with the guys that he works with and how cool that is as a fan. Getting to the WWE Network, what that process was like, and why this week the show was delayed. We talked about putting together StarCast. We talked about Scott Steiner. We talked about everything that you could possibly want to know from Conrad Thompson in this context. And we did it here on Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. And now I present that conversation to you, ladies and gentlemen, this week. My guest on Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast, it's Conrad Thompson.
And now, the Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast interview.
Well, back on Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. And by the way, for the record, this interview was it was booked a couple of days ago before there was any sort of creative differences between this gentleman and the WWE Network. This is not the last professional broadcaster, Sam Roberts, trying to chase an ambulance and jump on a scandal and, Conrad, you got to do my podcast now. I saw on Twitter you got some beef with... No, this happened before all that, but regardless... Conrad Thompson, the host of Something to Wrestle With, Something Else to Wrestle With, What Happened When, 83 Weeks. I mean, a guy who I feel like I've obviously I've been a part of the wrestling podcast world for a long time, and I've had my eye on the wrestling podcast world for even longer, but someone that definitely changed the game, and a cool dude. Conrad, welcome, man. What's the haps?
Wow, man. Thanks for that intro. Change the game. I hope I can live up to that.
Well, I feel like you do. Do you think in those terms? I hope I can live up to that when you start launching new shows, because it was one thing when you launched the show with Bruce, it was okay because, people were aware of the Ric Flair podcast and it had its fans. And, I had actually been introduced to you by my friend Kevin Undergaro, who to me was the first guy that came to me. He was like, you gotta listen to this Conrad guy. He's the perfect podcast sidekick. He's the guy. And this was way before Something to Wrestle With. I mean, he was a Ric Flair podcast super fan. But when you launched the Something to Wrestle With, I feel like that was sort of, okay, let's try and see if this works. Now, especially since the Schiavone podcast unconventionally has worked really well, you now launch 83 Weeks, which is working. I feel like you've gotten to a place where when you put your name on a show, it's coming with pretty high expectations.
Yeah, that sounds pretty arrogant for me to say that, but I appreciate when you say it because it is exactly how I feel. I felt like the pressure was on for the Ric Flair show when we relaunched it from Woo Nation to be good. And I didn't have any pressure when we launched Bruce, but when we launched Tony, I had incredible pressure. And this Bischoff one is one that I wanted to do for a while, but, that pressure was just something I wasn't sure that I could do. Like, what if it sucks? Candidly, I don't think a lot of people really enjoyed Bischoff on wrestling. And I don't think it was necessarily that Nick Houseman wasn't doing a good job or that Eric wasn't doing a good job. For whatever reason, it just wasn't the hit that everybody hoped it would be. And now I'm sort of trying to put, as Bruce would say, a fresh paint of coat on. And I was nervous about it. Like, what if this is a flop? Like, what if you just can't do it? What if you can't sort of change, Bischoff's podcast sucks, which is what people were saying. And I felt like, no, they don't see what I see. And that was pretty arrogant of me to think that, I can change it. And we did. We had a fresh format, and not really a fresh format, fresh for Bischoff, and it is what people call the Conrad format, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is what people sort of know me for, and they know that I'm going to dig in and dig deep, and I'm not going to, let them slide on some BS, and I'm going to call them out, and hopefully along the way we'll learn some things and have a few laughs. And to my surprise, man, this 83 Weeks thing has blown up in a way I never imagined. It's only, Bruce has every week, of course, a 2.5 day head start on him as far as downloads. But this Bischoff thing is going to catch Bruce faster than I didn't think anybody could touch Something to Wrestle. I thought Something to Wrestle was like, there's that, and then there's other wrestling podcasts that I might participate in, but I'll never be able to get close to that one. And, he's only like 25% behind download-wise, with a 2.5 day head start. And to me, that's just like, this should not be. How is this possible? But people are digging 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. So,
well, I reached out to you after I first heard it. I think the Brett one was the first one I listened to. But same way I reached out to you after I heard Something to Wrestle With the first time, and I was like, this is a good one. Like, this is, and I felt the same way about 83 Weeks when I heard it. But I do think that it's, and you probably wouldn't want to point this out because, again, it might sound egotistical coming from you, but I'm kind of a programming geek because that's what I do, in wrestling life and in real life. But I think, and maybe you learned this from doing the Tony show, that while, the Bischoff format is the Conrad Thompson format, it's different. Like you have now figured out a way to play to Schiavone's strengths, and you've reformatted that show. And the Bischoff format is not the same as the Bruce format. You know what I mean? I feel like it was a pretty smart, deliberate thing to kind of just go after fully formed concepts as opposed to specific characters or dates because, as you learned, I think, through trial and error, there's not very many people besides Bruce Prichard that remember all those details.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's the old Paul Heyman, man, accentuate the positives, hide the negatives. And that's what we sort of had to do with Tony Schiavone, is just adjust midstream and sort of play to his strengths. And let's have some silly slapstick comedy. And at the same time, leverage his strengths as an announcer. And on Bischoff, we're going to skew a little more business-like because that's sort of his perspective. And we can talk about the corporate structure and all that stuff. Whereas with Bruce, we're going to get some – I really do still believe Bruce is the best storyteller in wrestling. And so, a lot of times with Bruce, I just tee him up and let him go. And we've got enough chemistry now from just being real-life friends for so long that I can start a sentence and he can finish it. He knows – I'm the Scottie Pippen to his Michael Jordan. And, that's a weird analogy, but I really do believe that he knows, like, oh, he wants to head for this bit. And so that's almost what it's become on Bruce's show, is more of almost like a Stern feel where, we've got our Baba Booey, with chocolate titties. And, we've got so many of these silly,
kind of the same
random,
number of syllables, too.
Yeah, there you go. So we've got all these little silly things like that. And I think, none of those shows would work the same way with the formats would not, although they still feel kind of similar. It wouldn't work as well if we sort of shifted seats.
So when you're doing the show with Bischoff, and like I said, I listened to the Bret Hart one, and I heard you have to kind of figure out at the beginning of the show that it wasn't going to be the show you thought it was because Bischoff goes, no, I never offered a contract to Bret Hart. That whole thing in Wrestling with Shadows, the whole legend that you've heard about Bischoff offered Bret a big contract and then he decided to stay with Vince anyway, was a total fabrication, and Eric Bischoff never offered Bret Hart a contract in 1996. And that was kind of, when he said that, a few weeks ago at this point, I feel like that was the first any of us had ever heard of that even maybe wasn't true. So you hear that and you go, okay, this is going to be a really interesting show now, because I don't think anybody realizes that this sort of storytelling has been just that the whole time. Because I've heard the more recent episode where you have to go after him because you heard facts that were to the contrary of what he told you. When you start hearing, oh wait, Bischoff was either wrong or bullshitting, he definitely did offer Bret Hart a contract, and I don't know why he said that. Does it drive you crazy, or do you go, this is going to be fun just for a different reason because people are going to like that Bischoff is getting called out on something?
Yeah, that's exactly right, man. I've always sort of positioned our podcast as being entertainment. I appreciate that some people, consider my show to be almost like a journalistic view on wrestling, but that's not what it is, and that's never what it was intended to be. The only journalism involved in the show is when we refer to the work of Wade Keller or Brian Alvarez or, of course, Dave Meltzer. But that's really it. Everything else, man, we're trying to entertain you. And if we cannot take it too seriously and we can appreciate it as entertainment, but still learn some things along the way, but have a few laughs, that's what's better to me. But, it's one of those famous stories, and this exists in everything. It's old fishing stories, fish tales. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I caught a fish that was this big. We asked the other people who were on the boat 30 years ago, and they have a different accounting of how that really went down. But that's that way with divorce or business or sports. Or, my grandfather used to walk, to school every day uphill both ways. Like, that's not even possible. How was it uphill both ways? And so, it's one of those sort of deals. And so I never take it personal when I know that someone's just remembering something wrong. I mean, I don't believe not to be able George Costanza on you. But I don't believe that Bischoff believed he was lying.
Right.
The old Costanza is, it's not a lie if I believe it. Well, I really do believe that in that moment he believed it. But when someone produces evidence otherwise, I don't automatically jump to he's a liar, he's a con man, which is what the Meltzers of the world say. Because to Meltzer, this was his job to sort of, cover all of this and analyze it and then refer back to it. And he's covered it that way in great detail for 30 years. For Eric Bischoff, it was a deal he tried to put together 30 years ago that didn't happen. And so if you go back and you try to quiz me on mortgages I tried to put together 18 years ago that didn't happen, I don't remember.
Yes.
I mean, that's, so it would be easy for me to say, I never said that.
Especially if
and
it
I
was...
really might have. I don't think I'm lying there. I'm just, not remembering it the right way.
Especially if it was the hottest period in mortgages in the history of mortgages and you were just throwing them out left and right. All right, yeah, whatever. He needs a mortgage. We'll give them all mortgages. Whatever they need.
Yeah, I know that's a silly analogy, but on some level,
yeah,
me and you as wrestling fans were like, oh, remember that time? And it may have been something that was really important to us because we were at the height of our super fandom in our living room with our buddies. But to, a guy like Ric Flair, it was just another Monday, kid. It was no big deal. And so sometimes that's disappointing, but I'm sure to Eric, hey, it's just one more contract. That same year I signed a dozen more. And I get how it could all sort of run together 20 years later, and then I'm here making you sort of defend it and stand on it. And if you don't remember it and I read you something that doesn't really sound right, because let's be real, everything written in the Observer is not 100%. I mean, because some of that stuff goes through a filter of someone else. It's not like, if Meltzer's in the room when something happens, then yes, it's 100%. But if he's not, then he's still relying on, someone else's account most of the time. But with this whole Bret Hart contract, man, that's not the case because Meltzer held it in his hand. So I know for sure that Bischoff is mistaken. And that's the phrase I'm going to use. Not that Bischoff is a liar. I think lots of people can be mistaken and not intentionally lie. At this point, what does he have to gain by lying? That's my takeaway is if he lies about this, does he have some potential financial windfall? Absolutely not. So why would he lie?
No, I think that's exactly right, especially because Bischoff has also had, admitted periods in his life where he's completely shut the business out of his brain. Like this is not a Vince McMahon, for instance. This is not a guy who eats, sleeps, breathes. This is his baby. This is everything to him. Like, there are moments where I'm sure it has been, and there are moments where he's completely turned it off. And when that happens, I think the memory does kind of fade. It is ironic, though, because one of the Bischoff-isms that he talks about, not only on his podcast, but he's talked about it, I'm sure, in the interviews that I've done with him and other people have done with him, is he always talks about the fact that, these legends get built and these stories get built. And if somebody says something that they think is right enough times and other people hear it, it becomes, and they don't even realize they're lying, but the story just becomes something that it never was. And then you're able to say, hey, motherfucker, that's what you're doing right now. That's what this is.
Yeah, that's exactly right, man. And, he's really big on, the word narrative. And he always says, oh, that supports their narrative, or let's correct the narrative, or, oh, it's a bullshit narrative. Because he does believe, and I think he's right, that a lot of the things that WCW and he accomplished are sort of swept under the rug because, it doesn't really fit the WWE's corporate narrative of we dominated. These guys didn't know what they were doing. They were nitwits. Well, the reality is they knew what they were doing well enough to beat them 83 weeks in a row. And so that's the reason I even wanted to name the show 83 Weeks. And a lot of people hear the name of the show and assume that means we're just going to go chronologically and cover the Nitros week by week that beat Monday Night Raw. And that's not the plan. I just feel like Eric Bischoff is almost like he is Dr. Dre in that Forgot About Dre song. So many people just assume that he's this buffoon from TNA or the on-screen character in WWE who did the 3-minute wedding or whatever. That's all. Yes, he did all of that, and some of it was good and some of it wasn't good. But once upon a time, the dude revolutionized wrestling, and so many of his ideas and creations are influencing what we see today in a positive way. I just feel like they just sort of forgot about him. So I wanted the name of the show to celebrate what his accomplishments were, not just that he beat them for 83 weeks, but all the other little innovations along the way, whether it was really showcasing cruiserweights for the first time in a big way, the NWO, Nitro being live, going head-to-head with Vince, whatever it might be. There were some really spectacular moments in there that now are just sort of looked back and sort of glossed over like, oh, well, WCW was a bunch of goofballs who couldn't get it together. That's not true.
Yeah, man, I think that's really fair, and I think that's right. I think that people forget that under Eric Bischoff's kind of vision, WCW was behind WWE, the most successful any wrestling company has ever been. It was certainly the most competitive company that WWE has ever dealt with, and I don't think that even if it was only for 8 weeks, you'd have to give him some credit. But 83 weeks is a real thing. Speaking of, are you gonna say something about that?
I was just gonna say it's something Jim Crockett never did.
Right.
So it's weird that so many people look back fondly at Jim Crockett. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge JCP fan, obviously. But so many people look back at that so fondly, and they look back at ECW so fondly. But then they want to talk about, some of the silly stuff, the Dungeon of Doom or whatever with WCW. Man, there was only ever one guy who put Vince McMahon on his ass. It wasn't Paul Heyman. It wasn't Jim Cornette. It wasn't Jim Crockett. It darn sure wasn't Dixie Carter. It was Eric Bischoff. And the idea that sort of has been something nobody talks about anymore. And instead it's, he threw coffee at Eddie. He also put Eddie on TV. Mm-hmm. He also gave Eddie title runs. He also re-signed Eddie when Eddie hurt himself on New Year's, with a DUI accident. I mean, there's so many positives that he did along the way. He unmasked Rey Mysterio. He also made Rey Mysterio a household name in America. Now, I'm not saying that guy wouldn't have got there eventually on his own anyway, but in that time, Vince McMahon wasn't signing guys Rey Mysterio size, and he had an opportunity to sort of be showcased, and it's because somebody had a vision that was different enough to actually beat Vince. Not better than, different enough. And that's what I wanted to do with the podcast, and I didn't think he had really been given a fair shake to sort of tell his side of the story. Some of it's not going to be factual, but it's going to be the way he believes it, and that's what makes it fun. Bruce has been mistaken on the show before.
Yeah.
But the idea that we hold them to a standard that they're supposed to be perfect and remember everything perfectly every time is maybe a little unfair, because I don't in my real life.
Right. So, but I think it's also because as wrestling fans, like for whatever reason, the way wrestling connects with us, we look at it like a religion in the sense that guys like you and me remember every little detail of every single thing that we ever watched. And it's sort of unbelievable to us that anybody in that world wouldn't remember it on that level. But, these are guys who lived it. They weren't watching it from our seat. They were actually in the mix of things. And when you're a part of that machine, especially when it's moving at the speed that it moved in specific eras, there's no way you can remember everything.
Well, a great example of that is, I'm doing, usually 2, 3, sometimes 4-hour shows with Bruce every week, and I've been doing them less than 2 years now. But occasionally somebody will ask me on social media, hey, man, what episode did you guys talk about? And I know we've talked about it, but I, for the life of me, could not tell you which one it was.
Right.
And so that's for the first time I feel like some of these wrestlers who are like, I don't remember, bro. And I'm like in my head, like, how do you not remember? And I thought, man, that I can't imagine not remembering. I'm just doing a freaking podcast, and I don't remember when we told that story. Right. I remember we did it, but I don't know what day it was or what month it was or what episode it was. I remember vaguely the conversation, but when, where, why, how, no idea.
So you've also become, speaking of people remembering things a certain way, you've become a WWE Network personality as of 2018. First of all, and this is only because it's all over the place today, can you enlighten us in any way, shape, or form as to why this week's Something Else to Wrestle With is postponed a couple of days?
By the way, can I just apologize to you in advance right now? I guess it's not even really in advance. I owe you an apology. Can I do that?
Yeah, of course.
I have no business being on the WWE Network. You and Rosenberg are legitimate broadcasters who went to school for this, and you studied for this, and you've paid your dues tirelessly, and you've done everything you can in that industry, and now you're there. And I'm an obese, bearded man with a country accent who didn't go to school for it, who's just a wrestling fan, and I don't even do it for a living. I'm the mortgage guy, and yet somehow I'm on the network. It's offensive to people like you, I'm sure, and I apologize. I'm sorry.
Here, I'm going to tell you the way I see that, because I don't know if there are people who actually think that I would ever feel that way. But the thing about broadcasting, and I call myself the last professional broadcaster just because, I mean, there is some backstory and significance to it, but at the same time, it's like it's an identity, because the act of broadcasting is not like it's just, like Joe Rogan is not a broadcaster, right? Joe Rogan's a comedian, but he happens to be the biggest podcaster in the world. I think the biggest podcasters are also, like, Jericho's not a broadcaster, Austin's not a broadcaster, they're wrestlers, but they do these fabulous podcasts. I think the thing about broadcasting and podcasting and hosting is that, this isn't, everybody can talk. This isn't like singing or athletics. Like, we can all talk, we can all formulate a story. And I think if somebody can connect with an audience and figures out a way to do it in a way that hasn't been done exactly like that before, like, I don't have any ill will towards that whatsoever. I think that like, it makes sense to me that the show that you do is on the WWE Network, and I'm not doing it, so why wouldn't you be doing it?
Well, I appreciate that. I just know that, that the guys like you and Peter, you guys have worked a long time to be in that spot and spent your whole life dedicating to your craft. And, I'm this asshole over here with an Observer subscription, copy pasting and formatting, a Google Doc that I share with Brother Love, and somehow people watch it, and it's got to be like, what the hell is this? How is this possible?
There's parts of that, but at the same time, you do any kind of research into who Conrad is, and I'm like, look, a guy that makes a whole bunch of money selling mortgages and then spends that money on Ric Flair robes, he deserves every piece of he deserves every piece of the pie. I don't mind sharing it with that mentality. I'm like, no, that's the guy who deserves to be right there with us. So there's none of that on my part. But yeah, so is there any sort of I don't know, insight beyond what you posted about?
Yeah, listen, here's the deal. We ran a couple of topics up the flagpole, and we did that at the very beginning of the season. They said, hey, you can do whatever you want, cover whatever you want.
And what is that like? You just email the guys who are
they didn't ask for it. We said, what are the parameters? And they said, well, we don't want you to say goddamn, and if you do, we're going to cut out part of it, and they call it blading. Which is fun for wrestling, I guess. They're going to blade out part of that word. And they don't want us to say the F word. And I didn't realize that the F word also meant federation. But they smartened me up on that in the last week. Apparently, if you say WWF or World Wrestling Federation in something that was taped prior to 02, they're fine to air it. But if it was taped after 02, you can't say it. Well, I didn't know that, and nobody even told me that until last week. So I'm going to try to make a conscious effort, because I understand. I don't know, that's not popular for some of our Something to Wrestle fans, because they're like, but that's what it was called, and you're selling out. No, if there's a settlement in an actual lawsuit and I'm on their channel, I have to abide by whatever the lawsuit said for their channel. Now, on my channel, I can do whatever. And,
right.
I mean, either you get that or you don't, but that's not up to me. So that's really the only...
Somebody probably should have told me that before I let one slip on a pre-show, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, there you go. Once we understood, okay, don't say GD and don't say MF. And if you do, that's fine. We're just going to blade it out. And if you can help it, try not to use World Wrestling Federation or WWF, because we're recording this after 02. Once they said that, okay, got it. But I said, hey, Bruce, let's map out what the schedule should look like. Let's start with a brand new episode to get everybody to watch. And then I would like to do a lot of repeats that really could, leverage their library. And so my idea all along was, man, this Something to Wrestle podcast, the original show we were doing, would be tremendous if we could just splice in footage of what we were talking about, like the old Legends of Wrestling thing. And then that was the plan, for this. But, of course, a lot of people just wanted to see new content. The new content I want you to see is this archival footage that they own that they really have no reason to use. So, like, when they shot these old vignettes back in the day, they didn't just start rolling tape and stop rolling tape on the perfect cut, and that's all there was. There was lots of other stuff they just happened to capture while they're getting ready to tape this perfect shot, and I wanted you to be able to see some of that. So the guys in the studio all listen to the podcast and they love it. And so I share my format with them ahead of time. So if we're going to tape it on a Friday, I'll send it on a Wednesday. If we're going to tape it on a Sunday, I'll send it on a Thursday or Friday. And that gives them a couple of days to sort of pull clips so they can splice together. I'm not sending them a script for approval. I'm sending them a format so they have a jump start on pulling the tapes because they've got millions of hours there. So I understand that piece. Now, they've never asked us to get a list approved, but I did say, hey, I'd like to do some pretty controversial topics. And one of those controversial topics, I knew what was happening this week, and I thought, boy, that would be good timing. And so that was on the list, and we did a format, and everybody in the studio said, no, you can't do it. And then eventually it got to the tippy top, and they said, absolutely, this is what we're looking for, do it. But then some wrinkles happened, and they said, okay, maybe it's not the best time. Let's table that one for now. Can you give us something else? So we did WWE ECW, and I thought that would be a fun one because I'm passionate about ECW. Bruce is not. We're going to get a little bit of bickering, a little bit of back and forth. And that's also the hilarious story from the podcast where we learned about Vince McMahon teaching Kelly how to dance. I thought, man, we just got to have a video version of that. This will be tremendous.
Yeah.
So we taped an ECW version of the podcast. Well, along the way, apparently, because again, I shared my format with them ahead of time, and they know what's coming. They didn't ask for the format, to be clear. They didn't approve a topic or say you can't do a topic. I asked for one pretty controversial one. You can probably figure out what that is if you've been paying attention to what happened this week and maybe what's happening this weekend.
I sat as I was listening to you, and we're taping this, by the way, a day before the podcast airs, so you can all gauge whether you pay attention to wrestling news, UFC news, or legal news. You can guess exactly the topic that we're talking about.
So there you go. And so I'm thinking, okay, that'll be what we'll talk about, and everybody loved it at the tippy top. But then, of course, some lawyer somewhere said, hey, maybe wait a couple weeks. Maybe let's do that one later. So, okay, no problem. So we did the ECW one. Well, apparently there were some things we weren't supposed to talk about in there either, and they wanted to cut them out. And you can probably guess, again, what we're talking about here.
Yep.
But there are things that they would like to just be sort of erased from history, and I'm like, well, we got to talk about it. And so, we did our show like we normally do, and the guys in the studio thought we handled it the right way. We were good to go. But then when we got the rough cut, I said, this is probably something we should talk about. And so Bruce agreed, and ultimately the decision was made not to just be overridden. We did have creative control in our contract, and so we sort of get final say. And if you're going to cut us out saying the word federation or GD or MF, okay. But if you're going to change the content of the show, I don't want that. Here's what I had in mind. And so we went back and forth, and I feel like the show that is going to air Friday on WWE's ECW is going to be the show that we're proud of, and it'll be the show that I was looking for. But the idea that we're going to pretend certain things didn't happen and that we're going to sort of whitewash what ECW was, because forever the narrative from Bruce is, oh, it was a dead brand. ECW sucked. They didn't have any talent. They couldn't draw any money. That's the reason they went out of business. That's just not true. I mean, it was the hottest selling DVD. It did phenomenally on pay-per-view. It did have an audience. It could have been successful. They screwed it up. That's the story we should tell. And if we're really trying to be true to something to wrestle and give the fans what they want, we should tell the real version of the story, not the whitewashed WWE version. And I felt like with editing, that's what it was going to look like. And I didn't want that. So we're going back and forth. It probably won't happen again because now I think we have an understanding of, what we're looking for with the show, and they sort of know. And they'll probably have a little bit more time in the future to maybe pull some clips together and some edits together. And it's not the end of the deal, if that's what we're striving for. There's no trouble in paradise.
Still got a lot to go over with Conrad Thompson, but before we finish, I want to start something with you. And what I want to start with you is telling you how you can check out more live shows and have it not be a stressful situation. Stressful whether it's finding the right tickets. Stressful whether it's spending too much money. Stressful whether it's not knowing if you're getting ripped off or not. How are you going to do that? Through SeatGeek. All you need is your phone. You're probably listening to this show on your phone right now. Did you have any idea that on that phone of yours was also the ability to get tickets in the easiest and the best value humanly possible to whatever it is that you want to go to. Whether it's wrestling shows, whether it's concerts, whether it's comedy, whether it's Broadway, sports, football, baseball, basketball, whatever you need, SeatGeek has your back. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. It is so easy to use. Just the other day, I was checking out what type of SummerSlam tickets were available for Brooklyn, just because I wanted to see, because SeatGeek makes it so easy to see. They lay out a seating chart for you and a map so you can see where all the seats that are available are, and they rate the seats. They color code them so that you know which seats are the best value. This means that if you want to sit as close to the ring as humanly possible, if you want Finn Balor to sweat on you when he snaps back in his entrance, SeatGeek can make it happen. If all you're looking for is to make sure that you get the seat that is available for the best value, SeatGeek can make it happen. They combine data from all different sources so that you can be rest assured that you're getting the best possible deal. They guarantee every single transaction. So there's no more showing up at the arena, having them scan your ticket, and it goes, wah, 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 meow, and you have to go home. It's not going to happen anymore with SeatGeek, because all tickets are guaranteed to be 100% authentic, and it's the easiest way to do it. All you have to do is download the app on your phone. And get this, if you download the app on your phone right now, enter promo code SAM, and you are going to get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. That's right. For listening to Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast, $20 off your first purchase from SeatGeek. All you need to do is enter promo code SAM. Promo code SAM today, SAM, for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase using the SeatGeek app. Thanks to SeatGeek, one of the greatest sponsors Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast has ever had. And now, back to Conrad Thompson. Totally, everything you just said makes complete sense, and I'm picking up on everything, and I think most of the people listening can cross some of the T's and figure out what you're talking about. And it makes sense, to me, it makes sense from both spots, that there are certain things that when you tell certain stories need to be handled, whether it's because of legal reasons or otherwise, delicately, and you guys got to come to an understanding. I'm just kind of amazed that we're in a time, and WWE really has evolved as a company in a lot of ways, and this isn't the first time we've talked about it, but the idea that you guys would have creative control over your show to the point where you get a rough cut and can approve it is a pretty amazing thing based on where WWE was, maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Like that was the antithesis of what WWE was all about. It's kind of amazing to see, no?
The idea that I get to say Dave Meltzer's name on the WWE Network every week is just mind-blowing. If you're an old school fan, and they don't just mention Dave Meltzer once in a documentary somewhere that slips through, it's every freaking week. Yeah. I mean, to the point where shows are really based around what this guy, who they've always sort of avoided acknowledging. I mean, it's incredible. And WWE does deserve a lot of credit, because they don't have to do this. I mean, in the scheme of things, we may have a big podcast or whatever, but in the scheme of things, their bottom line's fine with or without us. They don't have to do it. We don't have any bargaining chips, but they do respect what we're trying to do, and they want what has made the show successful. And what's made the show successful is us being able to say more of this, less of that, and just sort of go with our gut. And if I am going to pat myself on the back for something, it's that I'm a fan. And so sometimes you get so ingrained in the wrestling business or any business that you can't appreciate what it's like to be a customer. On some level, I know people who've been selling mortgages for 20 years. They forgot what it's like to apply for a mortgage. Mm-hmm. So they handle their customer in a way that's really not the way you should handle a customer. Well, that's sort of the same thing here. Like, I think so many people who are old school wrestlers or old school wrestling promoters, it's been so long since they bought a ticket to wrestling, they don't really know what we want. And so I may be on the show, but I consider myself the first fan. I'm the first listener, and I'm just lucky enough to hear it before everybody else does. So I know, give me more of this, give me less of that. And that's the reason I think our show has worked in that I am a fan. And so I have an idea of, hey, what would I like? I think I have a similar taste to what wrestling the majority of wrestling fans will be into.
Yeah, and I mean that's part of the amazing thing, and I think that something that it's a trap that a lot of people run the risk of falling into is that you're such a fan that, I mean, it's the same reason like guys like me and Rosenberg were brought on, and we were expressly brought on to be the fan, like to not be a WWE broadcaster and not to try to be a WWE broadcaster, not to be the voice of the company, but to really be a fan. Sam, go and do whatever you would do on your podcast. Do it on the kickoff show and give me your opinion. Don't worry about the script. Don't worry about what this guy's doing. Just tell me what you think. And while a lot of people, think that I'm kind of in the WWE's pocket, you can go back and listen to tapes of me, from the last 10 years of doing stuff, whether it's, on the podcast or on Opie and Anthony or whatever. And I've been a WWE shill since long before I was ever involved in anything WWE. But that's to say that an interesting thing happens, and I don't know if you've experienced it, but you almost have to remind yourself that you're a fan because you start to get romanced with the idea of I'm such a fan of this thing that now WWE has let me put my foot in the door, and now I really just want to be connected with WWE. You see that with people. They go, at one point they kind of celebrated their independence, but the minute that WWE starts to open the door for them, they completely change, and it kind of spoils everything. That's kind of how you blow it, is you go on and you go, well, now I get to be this WWE person, and and you forget, no, man, that's not what brought you to the dance.
Well, and that I've tried so hard to go the other way.
Yeah.
I still buy WWE tickets. I mean, I could text and get comps, but that's not me doing. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying, I'm getting paid to do a show for WWE. It's no big deal to say, hey, y'all are coming to Huntsville this weekend. Could you slide me a few at will call? But I'm like, nah, I don't want to be that guy.
Right.
I try so hard not to, not just in that, but even in the first show we did on the network, so many people thought we were going to just sell out and kiss ass. So we did all of our catchphrases. I called them out on kissing Hunter's ass, and I tried to slide in as much China talk as we could, and just anything I can to sort of prove, hey, I'm not doing that, and I'm doing that not just for everybody else, but for me too, just as a way to say, hey man, this ain't my full-time gig. And I know there's a lot of people, and Vince Russo's even been talking about this on Twitter. His podcast network is where the podcasters who don't want wrestling jobs go. Dude, I don't want a wrestling job. I'm talking to you from my mortgage company right now. We're doing this in the middle of an afternoon, and when we hang up, I'm going to go write some more mortgages. I'm never going to do this full time. This is always going to be my hobby. It just turns out that my hobby pays me too. But that's what it is. It's going to be a fun escape, release, and when I have to just sort of acquiesce to every WWE request, it's probably not going to be as fun. So I'm going to leave myself a little flexibility to say, nah, I don't want to do that.
And the best evidence of that, and the best argument that is true, is that if you watch the show on the network, you guys do such a good job of filling the entire screen with as many plugs as humanly possible that there are not just wrestling plugs on there. There are mortgage plugs on the network show. And it's see, this guy knows where his bread is buttered.
Dude, if I'm honest with you, the only reason the podcast exists, any of them, is to sell mortgages. And I know that sounds crazy, and everybody has that reaction you just did, but the reality is I've been out here buying ads with radio stations and TV companies and now digitally for years to promote my mortgage company. And that's how I even got into doing radio commercials here in my local markets, is I would call in and we would do a funny bit about, a man in Florida was arrested for taking an alligator through the drive-thru or whatever. And I transitioned that into a funny mortgage spot somehow. And I just did that for 10 years. And then one day, once I meet Rick, he says, hey, man, why don't you come in and ask fan questions on a podcast with me? And, of course, if Ric Flair says, do you want to do a podcast with me? The answer is yes.
Right.
So I went and did it, even though I didn't even really know how to do it or what to do. And I became an accidental podcaster. But once I realized, hey, man, people are following me on Twitter. This thing's got legs. I've accidentally built an audience that might be bigger than some of the radio stations I pay to be on. Well, what if I just sold them mortgages that way? What if I just cut out the middleman? I'm not paying the radio station to put me on anymore. What if I'm actually paid to do it and I can sell them mortgages? Well, that's a win-win. And so what we've done is we've created audiences that we can sell products to, and that's not what fans want to hear. But man, that's the only reason Raw's on Monday every week, to sell products. And that's the reason our podcasts are there, to sell products. And if I could sell you Blue Apron, as fine as it is, or I could sell you First Family Mortgage, I make more money if I sell you First Family Mortgage.
Yeah, man. And I think that philosophy, whether you know it or not, is what podcast philosophy has been for a long time. I mean, if you talk to comedians, and that was one of the first industries to really take the podcast world by storm, was comics doing podcasts. The comedians that have big podcasts, all of them say that one of the best things about this is they don't have to go and do radio show after radio show to promote their gigs. They can just get on their own podcast, promote their gigs, and they get sellouts in the clubs because they're reaching their fans with their podcast. And it's the same thing, except instead of stand-up comedy, mortgages.
Well, but here's the thing. I ripped that off. Like Bruce and I do tours now. You know, we're going to be in Chicago at the House of Blues on June 16th. We're in Rochester, New York on July 7th. We're in Pittsburgh on July 8th. We're back at Gramercy SummerSlam weekend in Manhattan. So we're able to, the podcast allows us to just rip off that comedy model, and we're plugging our quote-unquote club dates on every single episode. But at the same time, we're selling T-shirts too. So I think what's made my stuff hit, and that's a weird thing to say out loud because it does sound very arrogant and douchey, and I apologize, but I'm a fan, number one, so I have a good frame of reference for what we fans want to hear. Number two, I understand that anything that's good has a lot of prep behind it. You know, the idea that you just turn on the microphone and now we're hugely successful is not real. There's got to be real prep behind it, and you know that as a professional.
Yeah.
And then number three, hey, how are we monetizing this? Because if we're just doing it and nobody's making any money, nobody's going to want to do it for very long.
Right.
And that's the ugly thing that nobody wants to talk about, because people want to assume that, you know, people are wrestlers because they love wrestling. Sure, they got into it because they love it, but they keep doing it, and they're on the road 400 days a year because it pays well. And so if I can find a way to put in a lot of show prep and a lot of my time and then leverage that time for a payday, and that makes the show better as a fan, then it's a win and it checks all three boxes.
I hung out a little bit with you guys it was WrestleMania weekend. That was when the announcement was made at the Hall of Fame that the podcast was coming to the network and all that. Now that you have spent a little bit more time, I mean, not a ton more time because you're still doing the network show and the podcast from home and all this stuff, but now that you spent a little more time with the inside of the WWE, have you interacted or caught a vibe from any of the people that you guys have talked about? I mean, whether that be as high as Vince, whether it be, you know, any Stephanie, Triple H, you know, you're just talking about sneaking in Triple H references on the first network show. Have you interacted with Triple H? Did you interact with him that weekend?
No, I've interacted with Triple H several times before the show because, you know, as you said, I own Ric Flair robes. So when they do a big Ric Flair exhibit at one of these accesses and they've got a bunch of Ric Flair memorabilia, or, I mean, I don't guess it's that big of a secret, a bunch of other memorabilia, they probably called me to say, hey, do you have this, or do you know someone who does? Mm-hmm. And so I'm one of these big wrestling weirdos who collect really cool stuff, and I know the other weirdos. So I'm really good friends with Ben Brown, and I'm probably not supposed to say that, but Ben Brown is obviously sort of Triple H's right-hand man, and he's the WWE archivist. So Triple H knows who I am, and at some of those events will go out of his way to come over and say, hey, man, I really appreciate you helping us out, which I'm proud to do. And you know, I mean, that's what you have this stuff for, is to sort of share it with everybody. And anyway, I know who he is, and he knows who I am, and we're not cross or anything. But it is funny that, you know, Bruce, still all these years later, I feel like just refuses to say anything negative about him at all, and not understand that I'm not asking him to say anything negative about him from a real life perspective, but to say every business decision he ever made was impeccable is a little silly. Like, I mean, everybody can look back and say, boy, I wish I had that one to do over again. And Hunter would too, but for whatever reason, Bruce won't do that. But no, to answer your question, I've had no bad vibes from anybody whatsoever. You know, I get a lot of guys who are way into it, some guys who don't listen and aren't into it, but nobody's like, look at this guy. I mean, they may be that way behind, you know, when I'm not there. But when I'm there, no one, I mean, everyone could be, you know, they couldn't be any nicer.
It's got to make you feel good, though, that as you just talked to me about feeling kind of weird about even being on the WWE Network, that not only do the guys who actually work for the WWE, like the wrestlers themselves, support, for the most part, I would think, unless you've heard otherwise, support the fact that you're on the network and also are fans of the product that you put out, because, you know, we all hear about how wrestling is this is a boys club, and there's an inner circle, and, you know, you're an outsider until you're an insider and all this stuff. So I would imagine that for a mortgage guy, there is a level of intimidation of, you know, are these guys going to accept how closely I'm being let in, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is that natural hesitation of, you know, everybody sort of wants to fit in. But at the same time, you know, I'm not in there saying, so, hey, who's going over tonight?
Right.
You know, that's not my place. And I never have a discussion with somebody about what a future storyline's going to be or anything like that. It is very much a mutual admiration society at times, because a lot of the wrestlers, you know, pass their time, you know, driving 300 miles a night, 4 nights a week, listening to podcasts. So inevitably, those guys usually find their way over to our show, whether it's, you know, a Finn Balor or a Corey Graves or a, you know, Drake from NXT or a Dolph Ziggler, or, of course, our man Kurt Hawkins or
Yes.
Zack Ryder, who've been with us from day one. And so word gets around, and occasionally it gets to somebody you're like, you listen to? Like Luke Harper or Ricky Morton. Like, well, why are you listening? How do you listen? But they do, and I appreciate what they do, and it's super cool that they even know who I am, because I'm just a fan who had a good idea and worked hard at it and roll tide.
I just love the idea of Ricky Morton figuring out how to download and listen to a podcast in general.
It's amazing to me that Ricky Morton not only has a podcast, but listens to podcasts. I mean, that dude's more up on it than we imagined.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Who, I guess, you know, Ricky Morton is an example, but are there any specific standouts of people in the industry or around the industry, or just names that we would know, that throughout this kind of journey of a couple of years you've heard are fans of the podcast that really blew your mind?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of crazy ones that I just would have never imagined, but the craziest one to me is Rick Rubin, because I'm such a hip-hop fan and such a music fan. The idea that Rick Rubin knows who I am or DMs me on Twitter is the silliest thing I've ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea, I like did a double take and thought, this isn't really him. And so just as a music fan and a fan of his work, that just sort of blew me away. But no, it's pretty cool that Hulk Hogan follows me and gave me a shout out for our show on the WWE Network on Facebook. You know, my mom thinks that this is all silly and dumb and doesn't really understand what I'm doing. And so she just knows she'll come over to my house and I'll be an hour late to dinner at my own house because I was in that room doing that wrestling shit. That's like what she thinks it is. And so even if she had never been to a show, she doesn't have the WWE Network, she doesn't, you know, Google my name and see the write-ups in this newspaper or whatever. So all of this is just silly. And so when I'm like, hey, Mom, I won this award for Podcast of the Year, she's like, okay, cool. When was the last time you had your teeth cleaned? You know, it's just
Right.
like, okay, thanks, Mom. But when I showed her a clip of Hulk Hogan, you know, putting us over on Facebook and saying, you know, hey, Brother Conrad and Bruce, man, they just did such a great job. When I showed my mom, she's like, oh, my God, that's Hulk Hogan. And it's like, Ric Flair has been to your house. She's like, yeah, I understand. But that was Hulk Hogan. And so that, to me, was like, that's when I knew, okay, Mom gets it. So now Mom's on board, and now once a week we'll say, hey, what's going on with the podcast? And then when I tell her, the follow-up question is always, has Hulk Hogan said anything else? Which is just hilarious to me.
It's amazing what it takes to get parents' approval. Like, my dad always thought all this wrestling stuff was so stupid all my life. It was, and I mean, into my adult life. It wasn't until he started seeing checks come in that he was like, oh, yeah, what's going on with that? Oh, you got another show? When's the next one? Like, then, once there were checks coming in for my dad, he was just interested in everything. But before that, it was all just the world's dumbest thing ever.
Well, I mean, even like the convention, you know, StarCast, which is available now at starcast.com, #cheap plug. Mom's like, so wait a minute, you're doing what you do? You're doing a show for 4 days? I'm like, no, not really. It's a convention. And she's like, a convention of what? And I was like, okay, the people who came to the show, yeah, well, they're going to come to this, and they're going to pay to meet other wrestlers. And, of course, the follow-up is Hulk Hogan going to be there?
Of course.
No. Why are people going to this? Okay, Mom. Thanks.
What other stuff, aside from the Ric Flair robes? Because I feel like that's a side of... Because the thing about your podcast is they're not Conrad shows, right? Like, your role on these podcasts is to get the most you can out of the people that you do the shows with. So I feel like, you know, people kind of know that you have some kind of memorabilia collection, but they don't really know. You keep everything pretty well hidden under that hat. Like, aside from the Ric Flair robes, what other notable pieces are in the Conrad collection?
Well, the Ric Flair robe was like the ultimate collectible and something I never thought I would get. But I did manage to land, like, obviously the old Dusty boots from Starrcade, which are visible on the WWE Network behind me. And I've got a pair of Flair boots and a pair of Arn boots. And what else do I have? Oh, I've got some trunks from Warrior and Hogan. And I've got those framed next to a really rare WrestleMania 7 poster where they were teasing it was going to be at the Coliseum. Of course, that didn't happen. I've got like little logo plates that Hulk Hogan wore on his world title. So it usually just says WWF and then it says champion below, but his says Hulk Hogan. I have one of those that was on his actual belt.
Wow. And
one of those for the Ultimate Warrior that was on his real belt. I've got the ECW Arena sign. They had a sign in the corner. Swanson had written it that says bingo. I've got that. So I've got some silly fun stuff like that, some old ring skirts and just some fun stuff like that. But most of it I don't get to display like I used to because now since I'm getting married, I've had to redecorate and it doesn't look like, every room is another man cave. So I don't have 8 man caves anymore. I've got like 1 or 2 and I'm going to have to make that work. And I think that's fair. I didn't have to go like paint anything pink or anything, so I should be all right.
Right. Yeah. The best thing that I ever did after I got married was we finally moved out of an apartment and into a house. And I told my wife, you can have whatever you want from the floor to the ceiling, to the floor to the sky is all yours. But the place needs to have a basement that's either finished or finishable, and you have absolutely no jurisdiction over what happens under these floorboards. And so that's all mine. And the one thing that remains that I have to get a mannequin because for our wedding, my wife, I don't know exactly how she got it, but she was able to procure for our wedding gift to me one of Goldust's original ring used outfits.
That's awesome.
So that's
so cool.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing that I have. Have you spoken to Scott Steiner at all?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I have spoken to Scott. After he was pretty upset that we sold the Steinerized shirt with a bunch of Sharpies with a rubber band around them. He was not pleased with that.
No.
And we had a pretty heated conversation. But through a mutual acquaintance, we have spoken in the last month or so. But we haven't actually seen each other in person, and I'm sure that will be quite the spectacle if and when that happens.
So, but things are not necessarily cool.
Well, I don't know that things are ever necessarily cool with Scott Steiner and anybody.
Right,
so
I see.
I guess I'm on that list. I mean, he has a reputation for being very volatile. He has never been that way with me, but he was certainly not happy about the Tony Schiavone podcast to the point that I guess at WrestleCon, someone asked him to autograph an 8x10 and to sign it as ham cubes. And he looked at the guy and said, "Fuck Tony and that other guy." Which made me really happy that I'm still that other guy.
Right. It really reminds you to your mom and to Scott Steiner, you're just that guy.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. If I was to tell my mom that Scott Steiner said, "Hey, fuck Conrad," she'd be like, "Well, what does Hulk Hogan think of Scott Steiner?"
Exactly. Well, Conrad, you got so much going on. Of course, I mean, are there still tickets available for Starrcast? Because I can't believe, and Starrcast, you talk about doing something right, because these wrestling conventions come and go, but I don't remember the last time I saw any kind of wrestling convention that was as loaded as you guys are loading Starrcast. It's pretty unbelievable, the amount of live shows and the specialty shows. Like, you could have easily done a thing where, okay, we got a bunch of guys with podcasts and they're just going to do live podcasts and go see them. But instead, everything that should be themed is themed. Things have a purpose. Things have a place, and it makes you, as you look at the lineup, go, well, this 4-day ticket actually has a lot of value to it. Like this is actually making me want to do days of live shows, because they're all, whether it's the death of WCW debate or the roast of Bruce Prichard or any of this stuff. It's kind of amazing the amount of work you guys all put in to creating a lineup.
I appreciate that, man. That's exactly what the strategy was, is let's try to create something unique and something different and put everybody in the best possible position as a fan to create a show that I would dig. And if I didn't think I would want to watch it or I would care about it, then I didn't even consider it. So it really is, sort of a dream lineup from what I think would be awesome. And hopefully, this one is successful enough that there's an All-In 2. And hopefully with that, there's a StarCast 2. But tickets are still available to meet all the wrestlers who are there. We've got over 50 superstars from Kevin Nash to Macaulay Culkin, and everybody in between is going to be there. And you can meet most of those guys in our vendor room. So you can get a 4-day pass and meet all these superstars on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for just $49, which I think is a tremendous value. You'll also have a common area where you'll be able to get your picture made with a lot of ring-used belts, including the big gold belt that Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes and Hulk Hogan himself played air guitar with. But we'll have a real Ric Flair robe there that you can put on and get your picture made with. But maybe my favorite thing we've put together is like a retro promo style deal where we're going to recreate the backdrop from TBS. We've got Tony Schiavone, a blue sport coat that has JCP Sports on it, an old school microphone, and you're going to be able to cut a promo on your phone and have your buddy videotape you cutting a promo with Tony Schiavone. And technically, you could do it while carrying the big gold belt and wearing a Ric Flair robe. And why not? Let's slide Lex Luger and J.J. Dillon and Tully Blanchard in the shot with you. And now you can pretend it's 1985 all over again.
Incredible. Well, if that's not going to sell you on this, I don't know what will. So get tickets to that. Download all these podcasts. Personally, I don't know when anybody would have time for my podcast anymore because you've monopolized the industry. But you're doing a good job at it, so I can't be upset.
Hey, man, it means a lot coming from you. I've always been a fan of your work. I mean, even back in the Opie and Anthony days, I was a listener and still appreciate what you do. And you represent us as fans awesome every time you're on WWE Network. And you get a bad rap, bro. I'm glad you're my friend.
Well, thanks a lot, buddy, and I look forward to seeing what's next. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.
Here is Sam Roberts.
Thanks to Conrad Thompson for being a part of Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast this week. Check out all projects he has available, and it's very, very interesting. I had forgotten that the last time Conrad Thompson has been on the podcast once before. He was my guest and co-hosted the State of Wrestling segment with me. He was not the main guest. He was the State of Wrestling guest. This time, he's the main guest. Last time Conrad was on, Robbie E. was the main guest. And apparently, Robbie E., the Rob Strauss brand from House of Hardcore, he can't leave well enough alone. Robbie E. goes where Conrad goes. Apparently, that's what he said. And I'm only calling him Robbie E. because that's what his social media all still says. But the Rob Strauss brand insisted that he too would like to be a part of Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. He said, if Conrad's going to be on, I got to be on. I got to tell you about this Rob Strauss brand, and I got to tell you about my podcast too. I'm doing my own podcast festival here on Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. That's the type of giving host that I am. It's remarkable. Ladies and gentlemen, here with us, a very special addition to Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast, is Rob Strauss, Robbie E.
I feel like every time I talk to you, I have like 10 new things that I'm doing. But then by the time I talk to you again, it's like 10 different things. So I must fail at everything I do because last time I talked to you, I was working on like 10 other projects that have been forgotten about now.
Yeah, but you figure out where the trend goes. Like you kind of just move with, okay, where are people going? Because you go like, well, I think last time we talked, we were talking about how Robbie E. as like a gimmick worked in the moment that it came out because Jersey Shore was so hot and it was something like super pop culture relevant on TNA. It was like before WWE didn't even have a Jersey Shore gimmick yet, and you kind of jumped on that. But the minute that, Jersey Shore isn't, the hot show on TV anymore, at least it's not that hot trend, you start looking around and you figure out where Rob kind of evolves to, right?
Oh, I always do. And that's the one good thing about me. I'm always on my toes for that kind of stuff. But what's crazy is now that I'm actually moving away from the Jersey Shore character completely, going into slowly changing my wrestling name from Robbie E. to the Robert Strauss brand, Jersey Shore's back on TV and doing big ratings, which is go figure.
Yeah, but you know what? It's something like the Paulie D, for example. He's made a career out of it. He's figured it out. But a lot of the guys, you know, the situations, the Ronnies, those guys you watch now, and it's like, oh man, these guys haven't moved on at all, huh?
Oh,
and
dude, it's done. Yeah, Paulie D and Snooki and JWoww are good. Everybody else, no good.
That's exactly right. But now you look around and it's like, because there was a time when you'd go on social media and you'd see like fist bumping and hair gel everywhere. But now I feel like every time I turn on social media, you see people that are just kind of repeating like Gary Vee and Malcolm Gladwell and sort of inspirational quotes like that. And then as I'm scrolling through my Instagram stories and the videos and stuff, I see the Robert Strauss brand comes on and starts telling me how to build a brand, and I'm going, what's going on? This is insane.
Well, I mean, would you expect anyone else to do that character? Because listen, most people, and I'm not saying all motivational speakers, but a lot of people think they're kind of just blowing smoke up people's butts and kind of full of it. And like, what perfect person to play a role like that than me, because that's what I do in real life.
Right. Like I like John Taffer, Gary Vee. Like there are guys that, you know, they have a history, like they've done something, and now they can channel that success and kind of teach the success. But I think like especially the younger people that do it, you go like, okay, so you're teaching people how to succeed, but you've never succeeded at anything except trying to convince people that you can tell them how to succeed.
Exactly.
What are we teaching here?
Exactly. Well, I mean, the Robert Strauss brand is basically, okay, so no matter what you're doing in your life, you could be better. So I could help losers be less of losers, or I could help millionaires be billionaires. Because even if you have a great life and you're making $100 million a year, you could be making $101 million a year. Like everyone could be better. And that's what the Robert Strauss brand is. Because so many people just get to a point and they settle. And the point in life is you got to keep striving to do better things. You know what I'm saying? You might have freaking, a great job that you love, but you could be doing something else that you love even more. Like if you think about it and go through your head, you could find things that you want to do. And it's like, why not do them? And I could help you do them. I could steer you in the direction to change your life in a positive way.
Plus, when you kind of phrase it like that, it means that you've completely opened up your market to even people that are completely successful and don't need any motivational speaker. You're like, no. You guys need me too. All of you need to be sending me your money.
That was I was going to get to next. I'm willing to help anyone that's willing, whether it's cash, check, PayPal, Venmo, whatever. As long as they're paying me,
right,
I'm going to help them. It's cool.
You'll take Apple Pay.
I will take Apple Pay.
It's kind of like it's kind of like when you think about it, it's kind of like the Brother Love of 2018 in the sense that when Brother Love came out, those televangelists were everywhere and it was kind of super relevant and nobody was doing it. And now the Robert Strauss brand character is totally familiar because that's kind of what infiltrates all of social media and gets people to just send money for God knows what.
And what's so crazy is I've been thinking of slowly, it's built up more, but of doing this character for a while now because of Gary Vee and stuff. And no one's really touched on it in wrestling. And it's so freaking relevant. It's so, like you said, it's everywhere you go on social media and no one's attempted to do it. And I just think it's a perfect fit for me. And I debuted it this past weekend in upstate New York and Canada for House of Hardcore. I think that was the perfect place to debut it, to kind of give it a platform that it's me that's doing it. And I'm going to keep branching it out more and more. And hopefully it could be, no one steals it from me and it's my thing.
I also just love that House of Hardcore really is the perfect venue for a character like that, because it's the antithesis. It's just so schlocky and not hardcore that did it get a good reaction?
Oh, got a great reaction. Yeah, I have this awesome microphone thing, like the headpiece thing that
the Britney Spears microphone.
About
the Britney Spears.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a slave for you microphone. Yeah,
a colored one that matches my gear, and I walk and talk to the ring, and it is just so obnoxious with my sweater and my shades, and I think it looks awesome, and it's totally me, and that's why I think the character is going to work so well, because I'm very comfortable playing it because I just get it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people choose to play characters in wrestling that they don't get. Mm-hmm. And I fully get what I'm trying to do. So it's, I think there's a lot of cool ideas we have and some cool stuff coming up. And I'm going to have a weekly video. The ones that you saw, the motivation, that's going to be a weekly thing. So
I hope
those will be on Twitch for House of Hardcore.
I hope you just fall into this character to the point where like people are actually watching the videos going like, yeah, this actually is good advice. And you just realize like, oh, there's more money in actually pretending to be a motivational speaker than pretending to be a motivational speaker in wrestling. Like you just do it for real and start putting out books and stuff.
Well, you know what's so crazy? When I put the first video up, I put on like Twitter and Instagram, and then I have a private Facebook for like family and friends, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, it's a cool, funny video. Let me just put it on there. And some of my family members or like some of my wife's friends are like commenting, or like I got private messages like, oh, I'm so great. So great. Your new career. This is awesome. What kind of stuff can I do for your brand? How can I be a part of it? Like, I swear to God, it's insane.
It's awesome. I mean, and that's how you know it's working, right? It's perfect.
Yeah, my mom was, because my mom's a very gullible person, and she is, she was confused by what it was, but she thought it was this whole new project that I'm doing. I was going to go around to schools and do speeches. She didn't understand.
But I feel like one of the reasons why this character is good for you is because of all the people that I kind of know and have talked to, you are somebody who, like, real life really maybe more than anybody else is just not afraid of the heat. Like, I can't think of anybody else, because last time you were on the podcast, you literally told me that you got more excited for the free stuff that you get after you wrestle than you do from wrestling. Like, you went on a wrestling podcast as a wrestler and said, I like wrestling, but what really gets me going is getting people to send me free stuff. So, like, you don't, like in life, you're just not afraid of heat. And so when that translates to a character, like, that's kind of the missing component, right? There's just no fear of like, oh no, people aren't going to like me. Like, okay, who cares?
Yeah, who gives a shit? Like you said, the first 20 seconds we were on the call, all I care about is myself. So, I mean, and that's true. But it's not bad heat. It's like good heat where people get a kick out of me, maybe.
Right,
and,
right.
They say, get a laugh out of it. I don't think anyone, like, hates me. But, yeah, I mean, dude, what would you rather do, wrestle or get free stuff? I mean, do the math.
Right. One hurts and the other is free stuff. It's like when you I guess it's
and I hustle so well getting free stuff. Hustling with this character is just going to be cake.
It really is. It really is. It's taking what you've kind of applied to your life for all these years and bringing it into this world of wrestling. It's really interesting too, because we were kind of talking about before we went on the air that, like, you as a person and how we kind of got acquainted was I brought you on my non-wrestling on my radio show on Sirius, just because people, I don't even remember who it was. You might remember. I don't remember. Like, somebody or a few people that are wrestlers had told me, like, oh no, Robbie E is a riot. He has no idea of anything going on outside himself. And this is before you had kids. This is before you were married. So this is really when you really didn't care about anybody except yourself. So, and not even in a bad way. It's almost in like this lovable way, because it's not malicious. It's just honest and true. And then I know this about you. And then I see that you're getting into the podcast game, which I think is cool. I think, it's just, especially wrestlers, as they figure out how to monetize their careers. I don't know why every wrestler doesn't try their hand at a podcast. But when you're the guy who's kind of doing exit interviews, like your concept for your podcast, which is a great concept, is How Did It End? Which is you're talking to guys about kind of the journey of their career, but really focusing on the end of their career, which is a highly emotional, potentially sensitive topic to tackle. And those aren't really the words that I would generally associate with you as a person,
Well, when I first thought of doing a podcast, like you said, everyone should be doing one. Well, so many people do them. It was like, it wasn't really a turn on to me, because it was just like, I didn't feel I would be into it, because it was like, well, if I'm just interviewing guys, like, I don't give a shit about their stories. I don't care about people. I only care about myself. So I would be bored.
And everybody's doing it, right? If there's no concept behind it, it's like, what difference does it make if I'm talking to this guy, if he's going to talk to every other wrestler that's doing a podcast? Like,
Exactly.
Right.
And what actually made me think about it is because when I started watching, my favorite part of wrestling was kind of like early 90s, mid 90s. And there's so many guys from like WCW and whatever that I used to watch that have like fell off, that I don't do indies with or conventions I never see. And I was like, what happened to these guys? So, like Lodi and Sick Boy and I don't know, you know who I'm like mid-90s WCW guys. That made me originally think of it like this would be cool to get guys on who have disappeared and people could, you know, when they hear their name say, oh shit, I forgot that guy existed. I want to hear his story. But then now it's kind of turned into, it's not necessarily that their career ended. For instance, like we had Simon Gotch on a few weeks ago. His career isn't over. It's restarting, but it's just why did his big run in WWE end? So whether it's their career or just a portion of their run that ended, it's that story. And I think it's just cool and it's something different. And it's track people. Plus, I think wrestlers that are on are willing to open up to me because I'm a fellow wrestler. You know what I'm saying? So I think guys are just like, dude, I'm not even asking questions. And like guys are just spilling the beans about stuff. And don't get me wrong, it's great. But I'm not like pulling it out of them. I just think they're cool to talk to me because I get it, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, and that's why like for this podcast from day one, like we've been going for however many years we've been going for. But from day one, I was pretty clear that the hook of Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast is that I'm a fan coming strictly from a fan perspective. I end up getting to know a lot of you guys, getting to interview a lot of you guys. I work in the media. I have access. But, like, you know, when you do an interview with me, I'm coming at you from the, yeah, I watch this stuff on TV. I'm watching from the crowd. Like, explain this to me. It's a completely different animal to have you appear in the locker room talking to somebody that you've been at a show with, or that maybe you haven't been at shows with these guys, but you guys have both worked the circuit and you have that in common. And I think that there is that kind of instant familiarity to it.
Yeah, and then what works well is, again, I'm the wrestler and the cool guy in the show, and then I have my dorky co-host, Matt Kuhn, who's the one with all the statistics that does the research. I don't do any research. I'm just there listening to the story, and I react like the people listening would react and ask questions that I think anybody would,
right.
Which I think makes it like a cool dynamic.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if you were the one doing any research, it would be so phony because it's like that's not you. Like that, like, can you imagine like going and researching these guys' stories? Like that's not you. That's not the Rob Strauss brand.
I'd end up asking him questions about me.
Would you, you really would. You ever see me? Remember in TNA, we went to New York and did those set of tapings? Did you see when when you, are there takeaways for you? Like when you hear these stories and guys are talking about how and why their run or career ended, do you go like, oh, that's something I got to watch out for? Oh, that's a feeling that I've felt. Oh, that teaches me that if that comes up in my life, I just got to either move past it or make this decision or anything like that?
I mean, sometimes, but like, I'm a pretty real and positive person. Like, you know, nothing, like a lot of stuff doesn't faze me. I live in my own world. So like I went into wrestling saying, you know, this might not last forever. If, you know, and you know me, I have so many other things lined up. So I just kind of take it day by day, and like I'm not worried about bad things happening in my life because I think it's impossible for bad things to happen in my life. I really do. So
I believe you.
Like it's impossible for me to have a bad life. It can't happen. So, but I will say, listening to the guys' stories, it like has been nice knowing like guys like Justin Credible and like Buff Bagwell we had on, like. I know that their social medias have blown up a little bit from being on. They've gotten some bookings out of it. So I'm glad guys like that who might be struggling a little bit are like getting something out of doing the interviews. So that's helping them, and that's cool because I think those guys are great. Do
you ever shift into Rob Strauss brand in the sense that like part of that Rob Strauss brand thing, as much as you get that it's like I understand why it's this heelish character and why it's hot air, part of you believes it, right? Because part of you is aware of the fact that you think positively, and because of that, you think you can have a positive life and nothing can ever go wrong. Like, do you find yourself on the show or even off the show going up to these guys and being like, look, your mindset's all wrong. Here's what you got to do. Or do you just not care?
No, I do. I actually do.
Yeah.
I'll hype them up a little bit before or after, maybe after we record.
Right.
Shoot like a positive text to him, like giving him some ideas of things to do. And then also don't forget now in my free email where I list all my credentials to companies when I get free stuff, I have added that I'm on this podcast, I'm a podcast host, and I can mention them on my podcast. So that's like a new thing to get me free stuff. Let's not forget.
And have you done that?
I'm a big time podcast host according to them.
Right. You're huge. I mean, it's a big iTunes rated podcast. Oh, it's awesome. Well, the podcast is called How It Ended, And that's
Why It Ended.
Why It Ended. It's called Why It Ended.
Yep.
If you look it up on iTunes, if you look up Robbie E., Matt Kuhn is your co-host, you can find it. I mean, I did a YouTube search for Robbie E. podcast. It pops right up. It's easy to find. But check that out, because I do like that there's a concept behind it. I think that is kind of necessary as people come out with podcasts now. And I think it's an interesting one, I mean, it's one of those that there are a lot of guys that fit that mold, and I think it's worth checking out. And tell people again where they can see like the early incarnations of this Rob Strauss brand character that is kind of taking over your life.
Well, I mean, you could see all the videos that I've aired on House of Hardcore on my Instagram, which is Real Robbie E, and my Twitter, Robbie E Impact. But every Wednesday on Twitch, House of Hardcore, the TV show, airs. And weekly on there, I have little video segments where I'm helping someone change their life or just being a lying, cheating, faking scumbag in some way. Check it out.
Do you write them or do you make them up? Are they all in your head? Like, because I would imagine you don't do them once a week. Like, you must go to the shows and like tape a whole bunch of them in a row.
Well, yeah. When I first did it, I created a whole bunch in a row. I did film like 10 in a shot.
Yeah.
And then, but yeah, no, I write them all in my head and come up with the ideas in my head. And then I had 2 different awesome video camera guys, one in New York who works for Fox, Steve Credo, and then one, Rami, who lives in Nashville, another awesome dude who helped me like create the vision and the videos and everything.
Are you going to change your social media names?
Yeah, dude, but they want to take away your blue check when you do that.
Oh, and
so I'm working on it, but it's like a long process.
And people are like, "Oh, that's such an ego move. Why do you need a blue check?" That's not an ego move. I already know that's not an ego move. I know.
A free stuff move.
That's it. You need the people that are sending you free stuff to know that you're verified on Twitter.
Of course.
Oh my
God. I'll say Robbie E till I die. I'm not going to get rid of that blue check. Whatever I'm going to do.
You haven't been on Impact in forever. It's still around.
Yeah, my God.
Well, thanks for being a part of the show, man, and I'm glad that we could let the people know what you're up to.
Thank you, man. I always love coming on. Appreciate it.
It's now time for this week's State of Wrestling.
You bet it is. State of Wrestling time here on Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. And what a week it's been. So we'll start. By the way, we are live on Facebook as we usually do. If you want to watch the State of Wrestling live as I tape it, then just friend me on or like me or whatever it is on Facebook at facebook.com/notsam, and you'll get a notification on Wednesday. Every Wednesday, late afternoon, evening, I do this thing live on Facebook as well, because why not? So, yeah, if you want to be a part of that, facebook.com/notsam. Of course, State of Wrestling, we run down the top 5 stories according to the last professional broadcaster, Sam Roberts, in the world of wrestling. And I feel like we have to talk about, technically to me, it's not a wrestling story. It's a legal story, but everything that is happening around this legal story is wrestling related. So we'll talk a little bit about the fact that the lawsuit between Dr. Amen and CM Punk and Colt Cabana is over. CM Punk and Colt Cabana apparently were sued for like $4 million by the WWE's doctor because of things that CM Punk said about the WWE's doctor on Colt Cabana's podcast, on the interview that CM Punk did with him, his sort of WWE exit interview. He only did the one podcast talking about this topic, and he went in super in-depth on this show and talked a lot of shit, quite frankly. And, the doctor said that it affected his livelihood, I guess, and the jury did not agree. The jury said, look, you got trolled on Twitter and everything, but they didn't see that it cost him his livelihood at all. So they did not rule in his favor. CM Punk and Colt Cabana, I'm sure, still had to pay a whole bunch of money for legal fees, but I'm happy for all cases, all parties that this whole thing is over. Because I'll tell you this, as long as that lawsuit was happening, people always say, oh, will CM Punk come back? Will CM Punk come back? I don't think CM Punk will be back in the WWE for a very long time, but I think that is CM Punk's choice. At this point, I think that ending this trial is the best thing that could happen for all parties, because now it takes that legal thing out of it. So before this, CM Punk, no way that he's going to be anywhere near a WWE ring, because there's a lawsuit going on, and WWE is not going to mess with that. Even though it's not a lawsuit with the WWE, the fact that it involves the WWE, they're not going to go anywhere near that thing. They're not going to touch it with a 150-foot pole. Now that it's over, we may be able to return to business as usual. And to me, it's not only is it not a guarantee, it's a likelihood that it's not going to happen anytime soon, but at least the door is open. At least there's not a legal stoppage from CM Punk doing something in WWE again. I believe at some point he'll be back. I mean, I guess it all depends. CM Punk's got a big fight. I can't believe that CM Punk was going through a lawsuit the week before, or the week of, technically, a UFC fight. This Saturday, CM Punk has his second fight. It's at UFC 225, I believe, in Chicago. And he's fighting the guy. So he lost to Mickey Gall in his UFC debut a while back. This weekend, CM Punk is fighting the guy who Mickey Gall beat. Now, that doesn't say anything because Mickey Gall also beat CM Punk. But, to me, this will be interesting. A lot of people felt like, okay, we got it out of our system the first time CM Punk fought, that they said, you can respect him all you want for the fact that he's pursuing this thing, but let's be honest, he's not ready to fight at a professional level. This week, we find out if he is or not. This weekend, I should say. We find out if he is or not. As a CM Punk fan, I want him to do well and I want him to be happy. As a fan of CM Punk and the person that he is, I want this to work for him because I just want him to be a happy guy. I wasn't mad at CM Punk when he left wrestling. I think part of being a fan of these guys is that you have to let them, if they're not happy doing what they're doing, you have to let them go do something else. There is nothing. WWE superstars are not indebted to us. We choose to cheer these guys. They entertain us. There's a relationship here. The relationship between professional wrestler and fan is that fans pay to be entertained by wrestlers and wrestlers entertain us. The fact that we're paying to be entertained by wrestlers does not mean that we have some kind of jurisdiction over what they do with their lives and their career. They are not owed, we are not owed a debt of gratitude for paying to be entertained by them. We're paying for the service that they're providing us. It's not charity. It's not like, we supported you for all these years. The least you could do is, no. You support somebody because of the entertainment that they provide. As long as they provide that entertainment, that relationship is filled. You pay for a ticket to a WWE show. Hopefully you got it at SeatGeek using the promo code SAM. But you pay for a WWE ticket. In exchange, the WWE puts on a show. That's the end of the relationship. Now, we want, as fans, we want guys to be wrestling forever that we like. I wish CM Punk had not taken a day off since he left WWE because I love him in a WWE ring. And as a selfish WWE fan, I hope that CM Punk's UFC run goes poorly and that he realizes that wrestling is his calling and he goes back to WWE. But that's just me as a selfish WWE fan. As a fan of CM Punk, the man, I just hope he's happy doing what he's doing. But if there is any part of you that wants to see CM Punk back in a WWE ring in any way, shape, or form, you should just be happy that this lawsuit is over. It says, do you think he uses the case as an excuse if he loses? Robert asked that. No, I don't think CM Punk really makes excuses. That's one thing, even in the podcast that he did, there was all this trouble around. He definitely talked smack. He definitely called people out, but he didn't do it in a way that he was making excuses for himself. If CM Punk loses at UFC this weekend, I don't think he'll bring up the trial. I think he'll say the better man won because that's kind of who he is. So I don't think he'll use it as an excuse. I think that it's fair that us fans have the conversation if he loses and says, well, what effect does it have that he was distracted all week working on this case? I don't know. I can't imagine sitting through a lawsuit and cutting weight at the same time. I'd be so cranky. I'd just have a headache and be irritable the whole time because I couldn't eat any of my foods. Nothing. The joy would be sucked out of me. I have to spend all day in this courtroom getting grilled, possibly in the hole for millions of dollars, and I can't even have my snack packs. Oh, torture. Let's go on to, you think that all CM Punk said was uncalled for? I mean, I don't know. Only CM Punk can answer that question. It's not up to me to say if what CM Punk said was called for or uncalled for. You know, CM Punk said at this trial that he didn't like listening back to the podcast because he was so bitter. You know, I didn't go through the experience that CM Punk went through. I am not the type to leave a place and badmouth it. I'm not the type to work with somebody or work with a company and badmouth them when I'm done. Even if the experience is not great, at some point the experience had to be good. There are benefits that came from this. You know, there's no way. There were moments in CM Punk's WWE career that he was having a good time. On some level, this is a dream come true that he wrestled here, right? Now, I'm sure there were tons of negatives too, as there are with everything. I'm not the type to leave a place and badmouth the people or the company. That's just not really what I do. But I didn't live through CM Punk's experience. So I can't say if what he said on the podcast was called for or uncalled for. I don't know how he was treated because I wasn't there. So that's it. You know, if I think that if you asked him today, he wouldn't do what he did. I don't think he would repeat that stuff because I think he's in a better place. He's removed from the situation. But sometimes, you know, when you're right there, you don't like something so much that you're leaving, your emotions get the better of you. So who knows? Let's move on to story number 4. Because story number 4 is important. Story number 4 is about the whereabouts of the authors of pain. We'll get into Raw and everything that went down on Raw this week and talk about it and dissect it. But it was made abundantly clear this week. Of course, questions of sanity come up too, and we'll address that. But it was made abundantly clear this week that the authors of pain have completely gone missing. After WrestleMania, they made their Raw debut. They told Paul Ellering to hit the bricks. I want to say they were on one Raw after that. I feel like they were, but I could be mistaken. Because the only main roster match that I really remember as a match was that debut Raw match because it was such a big deal. I feel like they were on the next week too, but I'm not 100% sure. These guys, not only have they not been on Raw, but they weren't even in the Tag Team Battle Royal. Now, we talked a little bit last week about the fact that, you know, the tag team divisions on both brands need a revamp. And I think that that's more true on Raw than it is on SmackDown. But I don't understand. I guess the Authors of Pain wrestled a few matches on Main Event. But they've not been on Raw soil since April. You know, we're in June now, and we had a battle royal to name the number 1 contenders. Now, the only thing I can think, and, you know, already, you know, people get upset because of the people who get called up from NXT that it doesn't pan out for. Now, you have to understand, there are people who have been called up from NXT that have panned out entirely. You know, I think you could easily make the argument that Finn Balor has panned out. I think you could easily make the argument that both Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn have panned out. I think you could make the argument that Charlotte has panned out. I think you could make the argument that Asuka has panned out. I think now you could make the argument that Nakamura has panned out. It took some time, but I think you could make that argument. It's not as set in stone as some of the other ones, but that argument could be made. The NXT program is by no stretch of the imagination a failure. But there is this thing, and look, you have to understand, just because of the way the products are different, every star in NXT is not going to be made into a star in the main roster. You simply can't do it because you can't have that. You can't have everybody be a star. So that's fine. You know, I'm not mad at that. The only thing I can think of, and I think that this is probably the case for Sanity too, is that the WWE sees the potential in the Authors of Pain. Because I see the potential in the Authors of Pain. You know, I think the Authors of Pain would make great opponents one day for the Bludgeon Brothers. And I think that that's something that it's unfortunate. I think SummerSlam is a little too close, But maybe at Survivor Series, you have some kind of interpromotional match between the Authors of Pain and the Bludgeon Brothers. Maybe the Authors of Pain are the only tag team that can come close to stopping the Bludgeon Brothers. But before we get there, you got to put the Authors of Pain on TV. I don't know why the decision is being made. Maybe there's something they did in their matches. Maybe there's something they did on Main Event, something they did in their first Raw match that the guys in charge of Raw, that Vince McMahon, that whoever it is, saw and said, I don't like that. I don't think they're actually ready quite yet. And I don't have a problem with that. Or maybe it's the fact that in the tag team division right now, you've got, Matt Hardy and Bray Wyatt, and there's this battle royal. Right now, the tag team championship match is Matt Hardy and Bray Wyatt versus the B team. The B team is a novelty act. I love them. I want to get the t-shirt, but it's a novelty thing. And the Matt Hardy Bray Wyatt tag team is less about making that tag team popular and more about making the two individuals popular, in my opinion. So there is this thing of maybe the WWE sees the Authors of Pain and sees them as a team that potentially could completely run through the tag team division. Maybe they see them as a team that needs to be dominant. Maybe the WWE doesn't want what happened to the Ascension to happen to the Authors of Pain. So what they're doing is they're going like, okay, look, I don't know what their spot is, so until there is a firm spot for the Authors of Pain, we are not putting them on television. Until we are ready to go all the way with the Authors of Pain, we're not putting them on. And that could be true. Maybe right now they want Matt Hardy and Bray Wyatt to have the titles for a while. Maybe right now they want to put a little spotlight on the B team. Maybe right now they want, the Revival to be doing something. Who knows? Who knows? But the point is that they can't have the Authors of Pain running roughshod through the entire tag team division. That's the audience. They can't have... It's okay. He's really... See, even my son, who is 16 months old, he is crying right now. He's crying off camera. And do you know why he's crying? Because the Authors of Pain aren't on TV, and he just doesn't understand it. He's shoving crackers in his mouth right now. He is drowning his... Listen to him. You hear him whining? You know why he's whining? Did he burp a little? Okay, he burped a little. Because the Authors of Pain aren't on TV, and he doesn't get it. That second cry just now was because Sanity isn't on TV, and he doesn't get it. He's saying, Dad, why do they tease us? Why put the Authors of Pain on TV? Why announce that Sanity is coming to SmackDown and then not have them there? And that is what I don't understand. That, to me, is the problem. That you gave us a little, like you told us this was happening and then took it away. If the Authors of Pain and Sanity just disappeared from NXT and then never showed up on the main roster until it was time, that would be fine. But when you've already told us that these two teams are on the roster, then it becomes super conspicuous when they're not there. I can only hope that this is going to end up being a positive. I can only hope that they don't want to waste them right now. And somebody in Facebook just said that that maybe, Dean Ambrose comes back with the Authors of Pain and it's some kind of new Shield thing. I don't know. It's possible. But, I probably wouldn't do that because I don't think it would be a good look for any of them. I think Dean Ambrose making a part 2 of the Shield would be weak for Dean Ambrose because everybody else has moved on. And I think the Authors of Pain are a strong enough act on their own. So I wouldn't go in that direction. But I think that now that you've kept them off TV, and the same thing with Sanity, you have to keep them off until it's time to really do something. And look, think about it this way. A lot of people were complaining about it, but if the Authors of Pain were not going to win the Tag Team Battle Royal on Raw, then maybe it's better that they weren't in it at all. The more I think about that, the more I kind of stand by it. Still annoyed that they've been introduced to us as being on Raw and then disappeared, and we know that we're never going to get an explanation for their disappearance. We know that they're just not going to address it. They're just going to come out one week. But I really, really hope that the optimistic Sam Roberts is right and that WWE just has great plans for the Authors of Pain because I think they're just potential. let's go into story number 3, and we go to SmackDown. So we'll just kind of run through SmackDown. There were 3 things that I want to talk about from SmackDown this week. I thought the AJ Nakamura segment was good. I love Nakamura as a heel. AJ smacking him was cool. You know, I'll tell you, that it really goes to show you something about AJ Styles and Nakamura when I'm amped. Not pumped, but amped for the AJ Styles Nakamura match at Money in the Bank. I'll be there for it, and I'm very excited to see it. And it tells you a lot about AJ Styles and Nakamura as performers. That their 4th match now on pay-per-view, you know, at least on a WWE Network special. We had WrestleMania, we had the Greatest Royal Rumble, we had Backlash. Now a 4th match where you can virtually guarantee that there will be more nut kicks than ever is going down at Money in the Bank. And I'm still excited for it. And part of that was that segment. I love Nakamura saying this pen doesn't work and throwing it at AJ. I loved AJ smacking Nakamura. I loved that for the first time in a long time, there was actually furniture in a general manager's office. Why don't they do more of that? Why don't you have Paige sitting at a desk? They used to have the general manager office actually look like an office. Now it's just a TV screen that we're standing next to. Get a chair. Make yourself comfortable. You're the general manager. You're in charge of this thing. People will respect you. Think about your boss at work. Can you imagine if you went into his office and he was just standing there next to a monitor and going like, hey, Bobby, I'm glad that you're here. Let's talk. No. An intimidating boss has a big desk and then an other portion of his office where there's couches and like a table. And you know it's good news when you go over to the couch, bad news when you're at the desk. Sam, come to my office. And I walk in the office, he goes, let's chat. And we sit down on the couches. I go, okay, this is going to be interesting. When he just has me stand at the desk, I go, this isn't going to go well. Let's have a little bit of that. Let's make the general manager feel like a real position of authority. All you need is a couple of chairs and a table. And I mean, I think it made a world of difference having that on SmackDown. I mean, I'm being a bit facetious. And I'm really, pinpointing detail after detail. But, I think it would be a good thing. I found it really interesting that Becky beat Charlotte. I mean, good for Becky. I don't know that this means anything one way or another. But, I'm interested to see over the next year how WrestleMania impacts Charlotte and Asuka. Because it really feels like, neither one of them have been dominant coming off of WrestleMania. And it's still only a couple months ago. We still got a lot of time left. We can still make that up. We can still cash in on all the credit that both got. But they haven't really looked like superheroes. Charlotte hasn't come across like this unstoppable force who ended Asuka's streak because she's gotten beat a couple times now. She hasn't won much since WrestleMania, to tell you the truth. And Asuka has not really caught her mojo back. And maybe she will at Money in the Bank. But I have to believe she's not going to win the Women's Championship at Money in the Bank. I'm sure there'll be some kind of chicanery. But I have to believe Asuka won't win. So, I mean, it's interesting because it's almost like, what did this do? Where did the WrestleMania match that was one of the best matches at WrestleMania between Charlotte and Asuka, where did that leave Charlotte and Asuka? Only time will tell, but it makes me a little worried. I'll tell you who looked strong on SmackDown was Renee Young. And I tweeted about this. But to me, I've said this a million times. Renee Young is one of the very talented people at WWE, one of the more talented people at WWE at her job. Renee Young is the best in her field, and I think that Renee, and this is one of the reasons why Talking Smack was so good, I feel like Renee needs something that positions her as a bigger star. And I know that that's not normal for interviewers, but like, for instance, I feel like Corey Graves is positioned as a star, right? Corey Graves is on both shows. Corey Graves gets to do color commentary. Corey Graves is positioned at a high level. I feel like the same thing should be done for Renee Young, and I didn't realize what it was until we got to SmackDown. if you're as old as I am, and you've been watching wrestling for as long as I have, when WWE would do syndicated shows, Superstars of Wrestling, Wrestling Challenge, stuff like that, they would have a whole bunch of jobber matches, right? They really wouldn't very often have even a mid-card good guy versus a mid-card bad guy. And if they did, that was a big main event match. But what they would, and they certainly wouldn't have, world champions or main event level guys even wrestling most of the time. But what they would do is they would do an interview segment. Sometimes it would be the Heartbreak Hotel with Shawn Michaels, the Barbershop with Brutus Beefcake, the Funeral Parlor with Paul Bearer. Of course, Piper's Pit is the classic one. But sometimes they would simply do a special interview with Mean Gene Okerlund. And they would do these at pay-per-views too, and they would build them as a special interview. And it would be an advertised thing. You got to tune in for this. It's a special interview. And it would be that stage that we see every now and then WWE pulls it out. The Okerlund position. It would be that stage that's positioned where Renee Young was with Big Cass on SmackDown. And it would be Mean Gene Okerlund and his special interview in front of the live audience. He'd bring out a superstar. The music would play. It'd be a whole thing. The audience would watch. It would look cool. And it would be a feature on the show. And I really think that Renee Young should have some kind of feature segment from that position every week. And you don't have to dress it up. It doesn't have to be as sort of involved as the Heartbreak Hotel, because I don't think this should be about getting Renee over necessarily. But I think it should position Renee as somebody special. And I think Renee being the person who hosts, nobody else hosts from that position. Renee's on both shows. I would keep it SmackDown exclusive just to give that visual effect to SmackDown, just to make the shows look different. But don't let anybody else broadcast from that position, and have Renee do it every single week. Big Cass comes out, and no ushering Renee off the stage either. Big Cass saying, "Go away, Renee, this is about me." Renee gets to stay. That's Renee's stage. But I think every week Renee Young should be doing something on that stage, bringing out The Miz, bringing out somebody. It could bring back, in a 4-minute segment, you could bring back some of that energy that SmackDown, that Talking Smack had brought to the table. Now, there is this conversation that we heard from the Fox deal, that there may be a WWE weekly studio show that is broadcast on Fox Sports 1, which would be like a Sports Center type of show, but for WWE. Of course, that's something Renee Young should be involved in. Of course, that's something that Sam Roberts should be involved in. But that's neither here nor there. What I think they should do every single week on SmackDown is have Renee come out and do that. And talk to whoever's out there making news or is going to make news. I just think it would be a super strong segment. Jace says, great idea. So many classic segments. LOD coming back. Sergeant Slaughter burning the flag. All kinds of stuff happened from up there. Remember the segment that the Ultimate Warrior was there on stage and Sensational Sherry was begging him and pleading with him and down on her knees? There was that. Papa Shango doing stuff. That's where the Ultimate Warrior had oil drip down from his face because Papa Shango was attacking him. All kinds of stuff happened in Mean Gene Okerlund special interviews. And I think that that's something that should be passed down to Renee Young. I think she's earned it. I think she's the one and only person to do that. I think that she's one of the few broadcasters that I trust to really inject their personality into this thing and would actually make the segment better. Not make the segment about her. It would help me care about the person she's talking to. I just think that that's what you do with that segment. Let's go on. And some people say Renee Young should be on commentary. I don't think Renee Young should be on commentary. I think that Renee Young, not that she couldn't do commentary, but I think that there's something about Renee Young is such a good host, right? There's something about the energy that she brings to the screen that I just don't think, I feel like if Renee Young were doing commentary, I'd sit there, I'd want to see Renee, the way she interacts with Graves, the way she interacts with Tom Phillips. There's a contagious energy to it that I would want to see. And that's the only reason that I wouldn't put her on commentary. I would put her in this hosting spot, but I do it every single week. And have AJ Styles be out there. and have Big Cass come out there and have Sanity come out there and have her ask a tough question. Where have you been, Sanity? Something like that, and have stuff happen. I just think that it's a good outlet that hasn't been used in a long time and that would really freshen up the show and be a good use of talent. Let's move on to story number 2. It says, Renee is the female Sam Roberts. I don't know if Renee Young is quite at that level yet, but she's getting there. Story number 2 was Monday Night Raw. So we talked about the Authors of Pain and the tag team situation. People were very critical of Monday Night Raw this week, and I can't fault that. I'll say this. I like Baron Corbin in the role that he's in with Stephanie McMahon. I think it gives Baron Corbin a chance to shine, and I think that he can do well in that role as a bad guy. In the world that we live in, a good guy general manager, and we've seen it with Kurt Angle, and we've seen it with Mick Foley, and we've seen it just doesn't work on Raw. It's just not entertaining. I think that having Baron Corbin there to argue with Kurt Angle, I think is going to be good. I think that we are owed a little bit of explanation as to why Stephanie McMahon out of the blue just said, hey, Baron Corbin, you can be the constable or whatever he is of Monday Night Raw. Why all of a sudden is Baron Corbin suited for management? However, I'm glad he's there, and I think that it's good. I thought the whole Kurt Hawkins segment was great. I thought that it was funny that they named the guy James Harden. I thought that it really delivered on Kurt Hawkins' character. I thought that when the crowd was chanting, we want tacos, for a second, I thought that Hawkins was losing them. And I was like, is he just continuing on with this promo? But he got them all on his side when he said, tacos for everybody. And I thought Baron Corbin coming out and interrupting it, even as random as it seemed, it reminded us what a bad guy Baron Corbin is. And it allowed us to maintain the losing streak of Kurt Hawkins, even though we thought maybe they're not going to give a victory to James Harden, are they? So, even though they're in Houston, I don't think so. So I actually thought that segment was pretty good in terms of getting everybody over, because everybody in the segment came out looking better. Couple of things. A lot of questions about the Natty Nia Jax thing. First of all, I don't think that I think that doing 2 worked injury segments in one show is weird. To have Alexa Bliss leave injured and have Natty leave injured, both women, both on the same show in the same night. I thought that was a little bit of overkill, but clearly they're going somewhere with this Nia Jax, Natalya, Ronda Rousey triangle. Personally, I think that Ronda Rousey should be used. I love that she's part of these segments, but I don't think she should be on commentary. I think she should just be sitting at ringside, because her best asset is when she does the mean stare at people. Have her at ringside just staring holes through Nia Jax while the match is going on. I think that would do more for Ronda than her being on commentary does. So I would put her there. I was a little disappointed by it, because now it seems like we're skewing more towards Natalya's involvement and the fact that she is going to be involved in this match, and that this match is going to work towards a Natalya-Ronda Rousey match, where as of last week, I was into Nia Jax versus Ronda Rousey. As of last week, I started getting excited about this match, and I actually changed my opinion on it. In my opinion, I think they should put the Women's Championship on Ronda Rousey. I think that they should still do this thing with Natalya. Clearly, they're building to something. I think they should put the Women's Championship on Ronda Rousey, and I think Natalya should go full heel and go after Ronda for the title. I think the main event of SummerSlam should be Natalya trying to take the Women's Championship away from Ronda Rousey. I think that would do the most for the most people. I think Nia Jax would survive it and will still have another opportunity to shine. But the fact of the matter is, no matter who the Raw Women's Champion is, Ronda Rousey is still the one that's going to get the most attention. So if she's the one that's going to get the most attention, and she's the one that all the networks are excited about, and she's the one making all this money for WWE, why not put the championship on her? You're revving her up to work a bunch of live events in the summer. Even if you don't, and the beauty of the schedule right now is, if Ronda Rousey were to win the Women's Championship at Money in the Bank, it's okay if she doesn't defend it at Extreme Rules, because not every title can get defended at every pay-per-view anyway. Now that the pay-per-views are dual-branded, you can't expect the Raw Women's Championship to be defended at every pay-per-view. It's just logical that it wouldn't be. So I'm okay, and then you can have her defend it next at SummerSlam, or maybe do a match with her on Raw. Have her defend it once on Raw. It's just like a really special occasion. But I would put the title on her. I would just bite the bullet, do it, find whatever the next thing is for Nia Jax. I think she makes a pretty good heel, as a matter of fact. So, I think that there's plenty to do with her. Maybe have her start running down the Riot Squad. That's not really a heel thing to do. But have her squash Mickie James. There's plenty to do with Nia. I think the world of Nia Jax. But if all the attention is going to be on Ronda Rousey anyway, I would put the title on Ronda Rousey and have Natty chase her for it. But do like a heel chase, like just make her life a living hell. I think that would be interesting, and I only started to feel that way in the build for Nia Jax versus Ronda. I started to get excited. I found myself getting excited about the match. Speaking of matches, Bobby Roode versus Braun Strowman this week on Raw. I mean, clearly Bobby Roode needs to be a bad guy, right? Clearly, this thing isn't working as a good guy. He's making faces at Braun. Like, it's not connecting. I want to believe that the seeds are being planted for a Bobby Roode heel turn. I don't know if it's true or not. I want to believe that that's what's happening, and I really hope it is, because I think that would save him. Right now, it's bad. Right now, that's bad, and Bobby Lashley versus Sami Zayn is bad. We went from Sami Zayn putting guys in drag to represent Bobby Lashley's sister to announcing that Bobby Lashley is stealing valor. He accused Bobby Lashley of stolen valor. Now, the most we've seen out of Bobby Lashley is he went from smiling to just glaring at Sami Zayn. If he is really upset that Sami Zayn is discrediting his military service, have Bobby Lashley run into the audience and chase Sami Zayn. Don't just glare at him from the ring. I think Bobby Lashley, when I interviewed Bobby Lashley, and again, go back to the interview that I did with Bobby Lashley on this podcast. You can go back through iTunes or Spotify or whatever and listen to the episode, or you can go on YouTube and look up the video and watch it. You will fall in love with Bobby Lashley after the interview, because I found myself a major Bobby Lashley supporter after that interview. Bobby Lashley said he thinks he can get people to cheer for Roman Reigns. Give him the opportunity. Bobby Lashley and Roman Reigns are the ones that should be feuding. Bobby Lashley should be mad at Roman because he's back to proclaim Roman's spot, and Roman should be furious at Bobby Lashley for trying to take away what Roman has spent the last several years building, thinking he can just roll up. Bobby Lashley and Roman Reigns should be the match that we are seeing. I think that Bobby Lashley is a major talent. I think Sami Zayn is a major talent. I think that they're, in this moment, being led astray. I think Sami Zayn should be in a different spot, and I think that Bobby Lashley and Roman Reigns should be the match that we're looking towards. But what do I know? Let's move on to story number one. Story number one. Shawn Michaels, who was on this podcast at this point over a year ago, I think the last time. But I asked Shawn the last time he was on this podcast about one more match and blah, blah, blah. And Shawn Michaels had a great answer on this podcast. And it was that he viewed his career as one long story. I mean, starting from AWA Midnight Rockers. But really, if we want to get into it, the Shawn Michaels of the Rockers. I mean, and if you think about it, he's right. It's one story. From the time that he was teaming with Marty Jannetty until the time that he lost at WrestleMania in his second match with The Undertaker. That is one story. You're talking about the guy who was in the Rockers, then the guy who turned on his partner, then the guy who won the Intercontinental title, then the guy who left Sensational Sherry behind, then the guy who brought on Diesel, then the guy that turned on Diesel, then the guy that Diesel helped because Sid turned on him, then the guy who needed to fulfill the boyhood dream, then the guy who had to go home, then the DX guy, then the guy who got injured, then the guy who returned with Triple H, then the guy who went at it with Jericho. Like, this is all one character. And that's very, very rare in wrestling. I think even Triple H, for example, I think it would be tough to tie Hunter Hearst Helmsley into Triple H. I think really the Triple H character that we know started in 97. You know, right around then when Triple H started. He was still kind of had shades of Hunter Hearst Helmsley with the robes and everything, but he wasn't really Hunter Hearst Helmsley, the American Blue Blood, anymore. Whereas Shawn, you can trace it back to the Rockers easily. The only other person I can think of that can do that is Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho, in everything that he's done, as much as everything has been so different, you can trace it back to the Lionheart in WCW. I think that's as far back as I can trace it. But you can go from Lionheart to the guy at Dominion for New Japan. And it's the same character. So, I mean, it's the same guy. He's evolved the same way Shawn Michaels did. And what Shawn said is the reason that it was artistic. Is one of the reasons why he didn't want to have another match. Number one, it was because he didn't think he could follow his match with The Undertaker. But number two is because that match with The Undertaker was the ultimate end to this amazing story. And I found myself agreeing with him. Interestingly enough, for the first time ever, this week, Shawn Michaels said that if everybody could accept that they were not going to get Mr. WrestleMania, they were not going to get the showstopper, right? That he may, under the right circumstances, come back for one dream match. And the names that he mentioned were Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, and Mr. Wrestling Johnny Gargano. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that working in NXT has given this to us. That Shawn Michaels being down there as a trainer, it's reminded him how much he loves professional wrestling, how much he loves WWE. And I think that he does have a bit of a hunger for one more match, and I wouldn't be surprised. And knowing Shawn, I wouldn't be surprised if Shawn Michaels' one more match doesn't take place at WrestleMania. I wouldn't be surprised if Shawn Michaels' one last match goes down at TakeOver Brooklyn March. If maybe at the TakeOver before WrestleMania, we see Shawn Michaels in one more match. And if I had to predict right now, I don't think that we will see Shawn Michaels in a ring with AJ Styles. That's the match that I would probably want to see the most. I don't think that's the match that we're going to see. I don't think that we'll see Shawn Michaels in the ring with Daniel Bryan. As much as I would love to see that, I don't think so. I don't think we're going to see Shawn Michaels in a match with Johnny Gargano. If I had to predict right now, if I had to put my money on Shawn Michaels having just one more match right now, I would go back to the last time he had just one more match. And that was not in WWE. That was in his Texas Wrestling Association. And that was in a ladder match, and it was a street fight, but really the purpose was to put what he was doing on the map. I believe that Shawn Michaels will wrestle one more match. I believe that that match will happen at the TakeOver before WrestleMania 35. Yeah, 35 in Brooklyn. Not in August in Brooklyn. So they're going to do TakeOver Brooklyn in August, and then they're going back to the Barclays Center for another TakeOver before WrestleMania this year, because SummerSlam of this year and WrestleMania of next year are both going to be in New York. So they're doing TakeOver Brooklyn in August, and then they're going to do it again at the end of March, beginning of April, whatever the date is. I believe that at that TakeOver, the TakeOver before next year's WrestleMania, Shawn Michaels will go one-on-one with Tommaso Ciampa. And that will be Shawn Michaels' big return match. I believe that between now and then, Shawn Michaels will take on some kind of on-screen role. Maybe he will replace William Regal. Maybe he will work with William Regal. Maybe he'll take on a different role than William Regal. But I believe that Shawn Michaels will act as an NXT authority figure. He's already out in public about his work with NXT. He's on the posters for the WWE UK tournament as an NXT representative. It's Shawn Michaels and Triple H on those posters. I believe Shawn Michaels will become an NXT on-screen character, and I believe that Shawn Michaels will main event a takeover against Tommaso Ciampa. And I believe that that match will be a street fight, and I believe that that match will tear the house down. That is what I foresee for the future of Shawn Michaels. I believe it will be takeover before WrestleMania. I believe it will be against Ciampa. That's what I think. Some people are saying, no way Shawn Michaels does a takeover. Shawn Michaels works for NXT. Shawn Michaels cares about NXT. Shawn Michaels is passionate about NXT, right? This return match wouldn't be about getting Shawn Michaels over. This return match would be about getting what Shawn Michaels is working towards over. Shawn Michaels is working towards the future. Shawn Michaels is working towards NXT. Shawn Michaels would want to get NXT over. Shawn's not coming back for a run. He specifically said, I'm not going to come back I'll come back for a match. I'm not coming back for a series of matches. So he's not coming back to get himself over. He's not coming back for one more shot at glory. He's not coming back for another run. He's coming back for one more special match. That match has got to be a match that is amazing. It's got to be a match that has a great opponent. And it's got to be a match that puts over something, that puts over what he wants to put over. What does Shawn Michaels want to lend his legacy and credibility to? NXT, obviously. It's what he's doing with his life. That's what he's doing for work right now. He's training at NXT. Shawn, main events, takeover against Ciampa. Mark my words. Mark my words. Whether he knows it or not. And by the way, Ciampa wins and breaks everybody's heart. Ciampa beats Shawn Michaels. You'll see. We'll see. If Shawn pops up on NXT TV going forward, don't say I didn't warn you. That's all I'm saying. Don't say I didn't warn you. It says Gargano versus Michaels is the best match for Gargano before he goes to the main roster. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need it. Gargano versus Michaels wouldn't do anything for Gargano, to tell you the truth. He's already proven himself to be next level. It would just be good guy versus good guy. We love Gargano. We love Shawn Michaels. It would be an amazing match. Gargano's telling amazing stories and having amazing matches, right? Gargano and Michaels would not be an amazing story. It would just be an amazing match. Ciampa versus Michaels would be an amazing story because Ciampa would be ruining Shawn's comeback. Ciampa would be hurting somebody that we love so much. We want to see Shawn Michaels come back. We want to see him be successful. Ciampa wouldn't let that happen. That's the match. And that's what I believe will happen. Callum is saying, so Ciampa stays in NXT all the way till next TakeOver? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Sanity and the Authors of Pain aren't even being used. The main roster is full. The main roster doesn't need anybody. Main roster is just now figuring out Drew McIntyre and Andrade Cien Almas. They're just now figuring out those guys, okay? Give them time. There's no reason to rush. The minute anybody does well in NXT, people are like, put them on the main roster. Aleister Black, Velveteen Dream, Gargano, Ciampa, the entire Undisputed Era, Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, Bobby Fish, Roderick Strong, all of these guys, and guys that I haven't mentioned, all of them are main roster ready. All of them. But you've got to have an NXT roster. And you can't fill up the main roster with guys because there's a finite amount of spots, you know? Ciampa goes up to the main roster, and you've still got Seth Rollins and Finn Balor and Kevin Owens and all of these guys going like, whoa, we haven't even achieved our full potential yet. It's not time for Ciampa to go to the main roster. It's time for Ciampa to shine at these TakeOver shows. And he's going to do that next April with Shawn Michaels. That's my prediction. Okay, thank you. My prediction is also that you enjoyed this week's Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. Don't forget to visit notsam.com for everything you need as far as the last professional broadcaster goes. And we will see you next week right here on Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast.
Thanks for listening. Follow at notsam on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And subscribe for free to listen every week to Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast.